he
that
was,
anymore.
yeah, it's all that to, to pay what you owe.
Yes.
It's that he can really live up to that traditional non-Socratic view of justice, that
Yeah.
it's transactional and they're fair transactions. He can also afford to harm his enemies if he wants.
So
you
much
know,
fun to have.
uh, well, I just used to wonder what is he talking about? And now I sort of think, well, he's talking about some very important things, but
Yes.
they're things. It's kind of like one of my math professors when I was always torn between studying math and philosophy and ended up doing both poorly. But
Yay.
but but he always said, you should study math. I mean, make it, full time. Really, really focus on it. It says because your career in mathematics will be over age 25, and
Do it now while you
you can
can.
spend the rest of your life doing philosophy if you want.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think age, not just getting older, but uh, changes in perspective of growing up does help with understanding philosophical text
Yes.
and philosophical problems. So, I do a lot better at reading philosophy now than I did when I'm young, and it's not because I'm smarter, because I'm clearly not, you know, or anything. But I think one, I go slower, and two, I have more appreciation for the life circumstances that.
Yeah.
Right.
You have a
So
richer frame of reference.
yeah, it's sort of.
Yeah, that's something I contemplate as well, that you don't have the same sharp mind you had when you were young. And you could think some really crazy thoughts when you're a teenager, but you have gains from experience. You've discovered that certain ideas just don't work.
That's
One
true.
thing I struggle with is the rationalists. I keep on telling them that they're mistaking absolute idealism with rationalism. Rationalism isn't about absolutes. It's irrational to be absolute.
I, I
It's extreme ideas like, once we cleanse the world of all the evil things, we will have good.
well, I was thinking something similar the other day. I was reading this article in the Wall Street Journal about sort of an article about the various nut jobs within the current Republican Party and the warfare that was going on as they each sought purity. That what they wanted was some sort of purity, and they had to purge the other nuts from the party. And I thought that was very much because I thought a lot when I was young, I was kind of absolutist and idealist. And a big a big step came in my just understanding of the world is that, the thinking of that Greek thing that I mentioned last week, kataphuse versus katanomos, the nomos convention. Most things, there's no hard right or wrong. We arrange them to suit ourselves. And for that, it's a different kind of knowledge that's required. But most of them, we just have to work it out. And so compromise is not failure to purify. It's just learning to get along, you know. Well, enough. I have to.
I had to put katafuse and katonomos in the chat
Yeah,
because I
well,
mean,
it's been 5 years, and I don't know. You put them in all the time, but
I
that is
do.
it's the fundamental thing. I mean, nomos. Some parts of what we might call nomos have a moral thing about like murder and robbery but others like not so much. That a lot of life is just convention, and we should just learn them and follow them in many cases. Get along. Oh, oh yeah. I wanted to say when I was talking last week, and it's already in the text, but like language, there's symbols and that words that point to things, but words themselves are objects within the world, whether written or spoken. They're either sounds or physical objects. Well, they're always physical objects.
Yes.
It's like sorting this out, sorting the symbols from the things, telling the finger from the moon. God, that's that you start. Yeah, you can spend a lifetime thinking about that. How can I tell the difference whether if I got a word or a reference here? I mean, a word or a thing. Am I got the reference or the thing referred to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, people talk about the search for meaning. The other word is what's the search for what's significant, because significance and meaning are part of the same picture.
Yes.
Something that keeps on coming up is that whole idea of creation ex nihilo, is it? Creation out of nothing. And people always, this is something which cropped up in Christianity, in the early days, that our God must be so powerful that he creates out of nothing. But if you look at the first verses of Genesis, it doesn't seem to say that. Like the first line is a preamble. It's not actually an active statement. It's the second line which says, there was a chaos and then the Spirit of God, which is so much like any other mythology, that the gods existed together with chaos and then created order in the chaos. But then we evolved to this sort of absolute God, creates out of nothing, because he has to. He's absolute.
Yeah, if he can't create out of nothing, then he must be constrained in some way, and we can't allow that. We need to dictate terms to God and tell him who he is.
But what if God chooses to be constrained?
No, 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 that's not okay. We can't allow it.
Oh, okay.
But yes, I mean, that's, it's part of what's been so interesting about having Ari in these discussions, is that, he presents this idea of a Jewish God who ostensibly is the same God as the medieval Christian God, and yet the Jews don't think that he is like infinitely good, infinitely powerful, infinitely knowing, infinitely everywhere, because they look at that and they say, well, you've created a problem. Where does evil come from? And the medieval say, don't ask. Somehow it's not God's fault, even though he has all the power. Let's not talk about it. So and the Jews are like, yeah, well, that's why we don't blame everything on God. We say some stuff is our fault. It's it's not okay to be using him as our a rug under which we sweep all the difficult questions. So it's interesting stuff. We're sort of, for those who are just joining us, we're ramping up gradually today. We don't have Sharon, we don't have Phil, and we've been sort of talking around philosophy to give them an opportunity to join, but I don't know if we're going to get either of them today. So we may just may just get started as soon as I share the links here with Barbara Scobie from Georgia. Welcome to our call, Barbara Scobie from Georgia. I can't remember if you've been to any of these before, but I don't think so. I think this is maybe your first time. And we've been doing this for a while, but we're always happy as we go along to slow down and answer questions about the material and what we're taking for granted in it. So I'm sharing you the link in the chat, like so. And then why don't we go ahead and get started? So this is our 163rd session of the Millennia Microcosm Kenneth Smith seminar. And we are working our way through his to be published book. The chapters were already published as a column called End Times in the back of a magazine called the Comics Journal back in the 1998-2000 timeframe. And David and I are working on pulling it all together into a book and adding footnotes and lexicon and all that sort of helpful stuff. And part of the way we're doing that is with all these discussions. We're working our way through the text a sentence at a time, exploring what they mean, exploring what's clear and what's not clear, and taking copious notes so that we can put all that stuff into the structure of the book. The book is organized in 3 sections. The first section is about the ancient world and its worldview. The middle section is about the medieval world and its worldview. That's the section we're in now. And the final section, the third, will be about the modern world and worldview. And the purpose of the book is to help us. We have the fish in the water problem. We've always been in the modern worldview. We don't know any other worldviews. We don't know what we're taking for granted, just like a fish can't discover water. It's not until we spend some significant time immersing ourselves in an alien worldview that we can then look back at modernity and go, oh my goodness, we all assumed the following things. I had no idea because we all assumed them. How would I see that? And that's the purpose of this book, is to get us through the practice of learning to see through different worldviews and collecting different worldviews, especially the ones that are really, really different. In other words, rather than trying to defend our worldview and tell everybody else they're wrong, we're trying to collect worldviews, learn how to see through them, learn how to use them. And then we want to have a toolbox in our life. If we come into a situation where the modern worldview doesn't seem helpful, maybe we can pick up the medieval worldview. Maybe that's more helpful for this situation. Maybe another one demands the ancient worldview or an indigenous worldview, or God knows how many there are. This is just an exercise in getting started. He's just getting us started. My estimate is it'll take something like, we've been doing these seminars since before we started this book, but it's in the time we've been doing this book, my estimate is it's been 3 years, and it'll be another 3 years to finish. So about 2 years per section, 2 years on the ancient world, 2 years on the medieval world, 2 years on the modern world. But I'm not holding us to a schedule. We're just advancing at the pace that we advance. If things are difficult, we slow down and make them easier by exploring them, expanding on them. And if they're easier, then we go faster. It'll take however long it takes. We're in no hurry. The point is the journey and the exploration together in the discussion. So we are in chapter 8. That's part of the medieval civilization section. And we are, it's about halfway through chapter 8. Are we more than halfway? Oh, no, we're about halfway. We're just starting into paragraphs 8 and 9. We did paragraphs 6 and 7 last week. Ari is joining. Hey, fantastic. Hi, Ari. Welcome to the call. Good to see you.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me.
Let me drop you the links right now. We've done a slow open, and we're just about to get started with the text. But let me give you the links, of course, as usual. There and here. And presumably, those of you who are on the call who haven't been here before, you would have seen on the Meetup website David Roell's 2-paragraph summary of what we'll be talking about this week. David writes those up himself. He does a great job of summarizing kind of where we're at in the chapter and what we're about to talk about. So feel free to review those. You have the links now. You can go check it out. And if you have any questions as we go, don't hesitate to ask. The fair warning about Kenneth Smith's writing is that it is dense, elusive, and poetic. He's constantly pointing at other philosophers and writers and artists, and sometimes he does it by naming them, and sometimes he does it by using turns of phrase that are stereotypical of some other writer. So we're slowing down and pointing out every time he does that so that you can sort of see. And his intent is not to create a philosophical system and be the guru and have us all be his disciples. He's not an escapist. That's what an escapist would do. He's an existentialist. He says the world is big and complicated. None of us understands the whole thing, and we shouldn't pretend to. And instead, we're joining a conversation that's been going on for thousands of years. So his approach to philosophy writing is like his approach was as a philosophy professor. He wants to constantly point you to the relevant conversation. Who's out there? What have they said? What might we slow down and go read? And we kind of do some of that in this seminar. So with that, let's get started. This chapter that we're in is about teleology, heaven and hell, and he's comparing and contrasting it with ancient conceptions of heaven and hell. Specifically, he's teaching us the medieval worldview by comparing it and contrasting it with the ancient worldview, which we got into in detail in chapter 4. So as we go along, I will be constantly pointing out where something he's saying is referencing some parallel but very different thing from the ancient world. So we can talk about it and explore and understand it. If you decide that you're interested in this material and you want to catch up, all of these seminars have been recorded. David Roel has them on his YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search for David Roel, you will find his channel. You can subscribe to it, and it's no problem finding the playlists. He keeps it up to date. So with that, why don't we dive in with the start of paragraph 8. And I'm not gonna allude back to last week this time. I'm just gonna dive in. So Kenneth Smith starts out, men naively sought help from God, a way of overcoming the vicissitudes of an unjust world. And before I go on, the context for this, of course, is that the medieval world arose out of the late Roman Empire. Not the Roman Empire at its glory, the Roman Empire at its most corrupt. So things are going badly. Life sucks for a lot of people, and as a result, people are looking for an understanding. Why is their worldview not working? They have an understanding of themselves and nature and God, and yet everything's going to hell, and they can't reconcile the two, and so they're looking for explanations. One of the things Hegel says is the owl of Minerva only takes flight with the fall of night. It's when things are bad that people start to philosophize. When a civilization is working, why would they philosophize? Right? There's no need to ask deep questions. Just go do the things you expect to do, and you'll get the outcomes you expect to get. But when things start to go bad, then people are stumped and they don't understand how did it come to be like this. So it finally makes them ask questions. Maybe it would have been better if they'd asked earlier on. But better late than never. So this is why he says, overcoming the vicissitudes of an unjust world. The unjust world is the late Roman Empire. And the frame of reference for this, we know, is St. Augustine's book, The City of God. Because in The City of God, Augustine contrasts the ideal city of God with the actual lived city of man, which is Rome in the late Roman Empire. And he's showing how all the corruption in the city of man is caused. He's got an explanation. He's got an understanding of the vicissitudes of this unjust world, and he explains them, and he shows how the problem is that we have fallible, corruptible human beings in charge of our politics. And he proposes what becomes the promise of the medieval era. It's almost a medieval manifesto, if you will, because he basically argues the problem is people. You can't trust people not to be corrupt. There's only one thing in the whole cosmos, says Augustine, that you can trust not to be corrupt, and that's God, because God is all good, all knowing, all powerful, and everywhere. So what we need to do is put our politics in the hands of God, because God cannot and will not lead us astray. He's too good for that. This is the core argument. This is what defines the next 1,000 years of European history, is that this argument catches fire. Everybody starts to look around at their corrupt world and go, well, hell, it can't be as bad as what we've got now. Let's try it. It sounds like it should work, right? So all of this is what he's invoking. He doesn't say Augustine here. He doesn't say City of God. He doesn't say City of Man. But these are exactly the themes from that work. This is what he's referencing. But he's making a judgment here, right? Kenneth is saying it was naive of men to seek help from God. It was naive of men, not because God is bad, but it was naive of men to assume that God has nothing better to do than to help them overcome their vicissitudes. Maybe God's busy. Maybe our vicissitudes are our own faults. And the worst thing that could happen would be somebody cleaning up our mess. When what ought to happen is, maybe we should endure the consequences of our actions so that we can learn not to do those things again. How are we going to learn not to? This is, I know, one of Geneva's favorite themes. How are we going to learn not to make mistakes unless we get a chance to make them and find out what happens when we do them? Right? So this is one of the reasons why it's naive to assume that God has nothing better to do than to clean up after all our messes, because then we'll never learn. Hi, Sharon. Hi, Jenny. Welcome to the call. I've been dropping the links in private chats, but with a couple of you joining in quick succession, I'm just going to put the links again in the main chat. We are in paragraph 8. We're just starting into paragraph 8. So here's the links. And
Yeah, I
here's
just couldn't get the link today very easily. So anyway, I guess I needed to go to Seattle meetup website. I didn't realize that.
You didn't miss
Anyway,
anything. You didn't miss anything. We took our time ramping up today. So we just started the first sentence of paragraph 8, and there it is in the chat, and there's the links. So men
okay,
naively
cool.
sought help from God, a way of overcoming the vicissitudes of an unjust world. All that we've said so far is we've tied this back to St. Augustine's City of God and the late Roman Empire. This is obviously, even though he doesn't say the words, obviously Kenneth is invoking the promise of the medieval worldview, the promise of its era is that men may be corruptible and be able to wreck anything, even Rome, but God is not corruptible. So for the next 1,000 years, we're going to embark on a project to take politics out of the hands of corruptible men and put them into the hands of an incorruptible God. And the use of the word naively here is really important. This is what we just said before you joined, because Kenneth is saying it's naive because it assumes that God thinks the best thing for us is for him to clean up after all our messes. That might be the worst thing to do. We might need to learn from our mistakes. And how are we going to learn from our mistakes if we don't endure the consequences of our own actions? So now we get into something I haven't said yet, which I was going to say, which is Aristotle himself flat out says humanity has come far enough from its original animalistic origins way back when. Humanity has come far enough that most of our problems in life aren't caused by external things anymore. Yes, there are volcanoes and there's earthquakes and there's storms and droughts. They still happen and they're awful. But that's not most of our problems. Most of our problems is behaving like idiots. We're cruel to each other. We're stupid. We're short-sighted. We get together and vote for a guy who's a con man who's going to take us for all we're worth. I mean, we need to wise up, says Aristotle. If we were to wise up, by no means would all of our problems go away as a species if we wised up, but most of our problems would go away, most of our current problems. And so, maybe God wants us to wise up. Maybe like a parent who sees what the child is going to try, sits back and says, okay, but watch what happens. Watch closely with the cause and effect and see what you can learn from this. Because it's the only way for the kid to internalize, oh, that thing that seems so obviously good to me is maybe not a good thing after all. Maybe it's an attractive nuisance. And I got to learn. Don't just reach for everything that looks shiny and appealing. Some of those shiny, appealing things are terrible mistakes. This is in line with what Donald was saying about some of Plato's dialogues where it's old men talking about how when they were young they were all idealistic and stuff, but now that they're older they're much happier because there's all kinds of pressures that are off them and they have so much more experience to judge their life from. There's certain categories of blunders they used to make when they were young, and now that they're older they're like, I know that's shiny and pretty, but I am not falling for it this time. I've been there and done that. So anyway, that's pretty much everything Kenneth's getting at in this sentence. It is a classic example of a Kenneth sentence in that in this case the allusions are not on the surface. He didn't say Augustine. He didn't say Aristotle. He didn't say City of God. He didn't actually say the medieval promise. But if you've been reading the whole book up until now, you can see you can see how those themes all weave into this sentence. This is one of his periodic summary sentences that's pulling a bunch of things, a bunch of threads together. And this is part of why when you read Kenneth, don't read him in a hurry. You'll be disappointed. If you read them in a hurry, you're gonna skip over most of the meaning, and the meaning's the juicy part. This is Kenneth. Again, for the people who haven't been here before, one of the best things about Kenneth's writing is that he is a follower of Nietzsche. Nietzsche famously said, it is my aspiration to say in 10 sentences what somebody else says in a book, what somebody else doesn't say in a book," says Nietzsche. He wants that compression of meaning. He wants to write philosophical poems that you can roll around in your mouth and in your mind and chew on and get juiciness from. And Nietzsche wants that because the archaic Greeks used to do that before Plato, before Aristotle, the generation of Thales and Heraclitus, and Anaximander, and all of these early philosophers, they wrote in this, what Kenneth calls a gnomic style, very dense and chewy. And the advantage of it is with a few words, you can imply a lot. And then people don't have to remember pages and pages and pages of text. They can just remember a few words and chew on them over the course of a lifetime. Nietzsche thinks that's amazing and he wants to do that. Kenneth agrees. That's amazing. I want to do that. Unfortunately, Kenneth is very verbose. But what he does do is with his verbosity, he tries to achieve that same density. So he can cover an enormous amount of ground in an essay, even though it's a lot of words. The words are pointing to even more things that aren't in the text. So it's still chewy. It's just not simple little sayings. All right, let's move on to. Oh, wait, no, Stephen, let's come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Just a bit curious about this idea of a God that teaches lessons. I mean, I sort of, it's a modern concept, the idea of progress and lessons, which strangely they're not doing too well at the moment. They talk about it, but they're doing pretty bad right now. It's a story like in history we experience better times and we say, yeah, it's pretty good. But the evolution, the unexpected evolution of good times is into bad times. The modern progressive doesn't accept that. They believe we've got the Enlightenment now. Progress is just going to be all the way up. The sky's the limit. But there's warnings. There's this sort of organicism of Goethe, that cultures don't work that way. They're like a plant. They shoot out of the ground. They fruit, everything's looking just wonderful, and then the fruit wilts, Culture wilts eventually. So this sort of idea, I don't know, a medieval concept of progress compared to our modernist concept of progress is a bit of a question. So, I mean, okay, the medieval concept is that God created a task for us. I know that's very much something which appears in Lessing, Gotthold Lessing, the idea of existence and history being a school, which is a very modernist concept. Hegel obviously drew heavily on Lessing's concept. So yeah, this sort of, how did the medievals or how did Aristotle express ideas about progress?
Great question, Stephen. Let's talk about that. That's fantastic. So in Aristotle and the Greeks, I mean, there's a famous bumper sticker slogan that people think is an Aristotle quote that's running around the internet. And it says, all who've meditated on the course of history conclude that the fate of empires depends on the education of the children. Now, as far as I can tell, I spent a whole day searching. I had access to the online text and I couldn't find it anywhere. I don't think it's a quote, But I think it's a paraphrase, and I think it's a damn good one. Because if Aristotle didn't say that, he said things that meant that. He takes about 3 pages in one of his books to say basically that one sentence. And so I'm willing to grant the sentences of its authentic paraphrase of Aristotle. And this is because, there's that Greek concept of sophrosune, and that human beings lack sophrosune. The animals and plants have it. Nature has sort of beat it into them through evolution, but people don't have it. And so we can be brilliant and great and good, or we can be awful and stupid and cruel. And that range of behavior is dangerous. When Aristotle says that the main threat to most human societies is people, both themselves and other people, part of what he's talking about is the lack of sophrosune puts us into a kind of existential risk that most species don't encounter. And this is the setup for his statement that everything depends on the education of the children. It's like we may not have the instincts to sophrosune, but if we build a healthy culture, then we can raise people to be able to approximate sophrosune. And in fact, if we don't do that, we're in trouble because the worst of people can it's like you're sitting there building your model in your room and your brother comes stomping in and smashes everything. He may be less powerful than you and less intelligent than you, but he can still break your beautiful thing far more easily and quickly than the time it took you to make the beautiful thing. And this is essentially what Aristotle's saying, is that this is the problem, is these things that we need to survive in a civilization or a culture, that you really have to get everybody on board. You have to, educate. Even the slaves need to read the Iliad and the Odyssey. They need to learn about tragedy. They need to understand the problems with human beings. So baked into this is the concept that it is possible to do better, that there can be some kind of progress. Because if not, he would have just said, fuck it, let's all die. And there were Greeks and there are Greek myths that say that. The one about Silenus,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
myth of Silenus. It's a classic counterexample, right? For those of you who don't know what Stephen knows, um, a lot of moderns call the Greeks misanthropes. They say they're pessimists. They say nasty things about people. And it's understandable that in America, where we cheerlead our country all the time, even the faintest criticism would horrify and shock us. You can't say those things. And they say that not about one country, but they say it about all people. People have a problem, and it's a serious problem, and we need to focus on it if we're going to overcome it. Well, not everybody was as optimistic as Aristotle that the problem could be overcome. So there is a myth, and it's not a popular myth, but it keeps running around Greek circles because they feel it's too juicy to give up. And the myth is that, was it Midas? I can't remember who it was.
Some legends, yeah, it's Midas asking the question.
I think
They
it's
capture
Midas.
Silenus as he's going for a drink in the morning or something. As an
Yes.
alcoholic would, he's probably a bit dehydrated.
Yes.
So this
Yes.
is the outlook of an alcoholic.
Yes. Okay, let's go with that. So the idea is Midas is the richest guy on earth, and he's basically invented money, and now he's everything he touches turns to gold is the metaphor, right? So this guy has all this power because he has all this wealth, and what's he going to do with it? Well, now he'd like to know the meaning of life, and he wants to get it straight from the lips of a god, because the gods don't lie. And I mean, the Greek gods don't lie. It's they consider the human aptitude for lying to be just part of our horrible, horrible character. It's just an example of how despicable we are. That they tell the truth, come what may. So it's part of why aristocratic Greeks value telling the truth. They want to be like the gods. So he wants to capture Silenus. And the reason he wants to capture Silenus is because Silenus is a little god. He's not like Zeus. Nobody could capture Zeus. He'd thunderbolt up your butt. But but Silenus is a little woodland god who gets drunk, as Stephen points out. So Midas has his guys capture Silenus when he's passed out drunk, or trying to get water from a woodland stream, and he binds him up. And he says, "Okay, Silenus, I'm going to let you go. Of course, you're a god, and I respect that. I'm sorry I had to do this, but I have a question that I need to know the answer to. I have all this wealth and I want to put it to the best possible use." So he says, "What is best for man?" And Silenus, maybe as Stephen says, because he's got a hangover, but it's the truth as far as Silenus knows. His answer is never to have been born.
Yeah, before that, he said, why should I tell you what would not profit you?
Yes, yes, that's what he says. Why should I tell you what will not profit you? But Midas is like, no, come on, don't keep secrets. I need to know what's best, because so that I can put all my wealth to use. And so it's fine. What is best for man is never to have been born, but failing that, to die swiftly.
Or it
Now,
could have been to die young. You,
to
you
die
can imply
young,
different things from it,
you
but
can
you'll
read it
probably
different
die
ways.
more happily if you die young.
Yes, yes. So, what a modern sees in this is what a downer. This is a stupid myth. It's just pessimistic. This doesn't, I can't do anything with this myth. There's nowhere to go with this. But actually there is somewhere to go with it, and it's somewhere useful. And it is the the Greeks believed that their gods believed that humankind has a serious problem. And if we would deal with that problem, maybe we'd be cool. But we keep ignoring the problem, or God, making it worse. It's like, what is wrong with us? And the level of frustration that the Greek gods have with the Greeks is captured by the myth of Silenus. Of course, Midas lets him go. He did not want any of these answers. And the last thing he wants is another sentence out of Silenus. Please don't tell me anymore. My ears are bleeding, you know. But the point of it is to say the core problem of humanity is not something we should excuse and paper over and try not to talk about. It is a deadly serious problem. It's so serious the gods are disgusted by it. And our only hope is to turn and face it and take it seriously. That's what Aristotle's saying. Everything depends on the education of the children. Good or evil, whether our society is going to make it or not, it all depends. Because if we let people turn into little cyclopses who think they should consume each other, cannibalism, then we're lost. Especially if one of those people gets in power, as he says in the politics. He's like, I don't care if you have one guy in charge or a few guys in charge or everybody in charge. That's not the important question. I could care less. I want to know whether the people in charge have sophrosyne. If they've got sophrosyne, hey, we're good. I don't care how many or few of them there are. That's great because they're going to try to do the right thing. But if they don't have Sophrosyne, adding more of them doesn't make it any better. Now you just have a lot of people with stupid ideas. This is worse. How is this an improvement? So this is partially an answer to what Stephen said. The question of progress is Aristotle thinks that there's hope, but it requires serious cultural investment in educating people to not be so foolish. Now, the rest of the answer, it's a great question, Stephen. The rest of the answer goes to the medieval side that he asked about. And he's right that by the time you get to the high Middle Ages, there's not much talk about progress. That's the last thing, especially in the late era. The last thing that the medieval world wants is progress because they've got a grip on everything. Progress would mean, and also they've got a grip on everything in detail. Anything you change, somebody's losing a lot of power and money. They don't want you to change anything. They just want an eternal continuation of the current state of affairs. And that leads us to think that that is the essence of the medieval world, but it's not. Because the medieval world started as a revolution. It started by rejecting the ancient worldview and its value system. And it didn't reject it out of petulance, it rejected it because it had a critique. Why is everything in the late Roman Empire a disaster? We can do better than this. We know we can do better than this because our God is uncorruptible. So we're going to put our future in the hands of that God. We're going to take it away from the Roman emperors and we're going to give it to our perfect God. And that will be progress. And and no matter how benighted people are, core to the medieval worldview and theology is that every single person has the gift of grace from God. And that gift of grace means you're never lost. No matter what you've done, at any time in your life, you could still hear the still small voice inside that leads you back to Jesus and salvation and goodness. You shouldn't give up on anyone. You should always reach out. Reach out to the poor, reach out to the sick, reach out to the heathens, reach out
Well,
to
that
the
was
king.
Nietzsche's point. The church placed some measure of value on everybody.
Yes,
Our modern society can reduce a person to zero.
exactly.
And he seemed to have the attitude that this attitude is going to prove very costly.
Yes. Nietzsche's brilliant on this, and we're going to talk about it a lot when we get to the modern era, but it was good to bring it up here because he's making the point, right? That the medieval world did believe in progress. They believed that they could progress from the mess of the late ancient world to something better, and ostensibly they did. And they believed that each individual can make progress towards God. It's never too late as long as you have breath. So this is what progress meant to them.
The
And
other
even,
question is
but
the nature of human spirit, because you look at Jung, and Jung seems to imply that humans have a passive spirit, whereas a god has an active spirit.
yes,
You got, say, Rene Girard seems to have something that man's a great mimic, but is there a true reality in man? He mimics reality, he mimics ideas, he mimics spirits, but does he have the real stuff?
yes, but I'm going to have to wait to answer that one because it's a little askew from the current sentences, and I want to play Sharon here and make sure we don't get too far away from the text. But we will come back to that because the question that you're asking is obviously one of the most important central questions to the definition of the medieval worldview. We have to talk about it. I'm just maybe not just this moment. Um, but thank you, Stephen.
Thanks.
As usual, you've got great questions. Ginny, what's on your mind?
Well, it's not the entire human race that is so bad and aggressive and misbehave. It's that small percentage, and yet that small percentage of aggressive, ultra aggressive human beings that makes the rest of the human race's life so miserable. And right, it's because they're just think about these people in this meeting right now. None of us are aggressive, mean, ready to destroy each other. I mean, right?
Yeah, but we're
It's
not Greeks. We're
Oh,
not
okay.
we're not
Okay, we're
Greeks.
talking about Greeks. Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm just talking about human race in general, the way I see them.
yeah.
So it's that like 1% who are just causing all that pain for the rest of the country or the tribe or whatever. So I like to think that there are good human beings out there, you know.
Aristotle believes in the possibility. I mean,
Yeah.
his very name has Aristos in it. That's why he's
Oh,
Aristotle. And he believes that it's possible for people that this is part of his idea of progress. He believes it's possible for people to learn to do better. If they are given the cultural tools to understand their duties and responsibilities to cultivate themselves, and if they apply themselves to doing that, they can become smarter, better educated, wiser, kinder. All of these things are possible, but they have to want to do it. So it's not that he's denying the possibility of good people or progress, but rather he's tapping into a very old frustration that the Greeks have. So remember, the founding myth of classical Greece, as opposed to archaic Greece, is the story of the Trojan War. And the story of the Trojan War is how the very best Greeks in the world wrecked everything. They wrecked it all. And it was their virtues. They were brave, right? They were forthright. They have all these virtues, and yet somehow those virtues lead them to march off to war and ultimately destroy Bronze Age civilization. They caused a dark age that lasted centuries. So the Greek view of history and human nature starts out of pessimism. In the 776 time frame when they start the Olympic Games back up after the Dark Age, they're clawing their way out of a Dark Age. They're trying to promote literacy. They're trying to talk to each other instead of fight each other. They're trying to have competitions instead of conflicts, says Nietzsche. They're trying to learn how not to just claw and scrabble at each other like rabid animals. And so their sense is that when people are at their worst, they're awful. They're the worst of all animals. And it's incumbent upon Greek civilization to do everything they can to move as far from that baseline as they can, to try to do better, to learn to do better, to spread literacy, to spread the story of the Trojan War, to get people, it's a little wisdom, like they would put up these stone pillars with things like Gnothi Seauton on them or Medinagon, nothing to excess. They're trying to spread wisdom literature everywhere that they go. Even on the border of India, Alexander the Great's army erected one of these pillars with all the little pithy sayings of the wise men, the same one that used to stand at the Oracle of Delphi. They made one just like it. And in fact, one of those survived, which is how we know what the whole list is. Otherwise, we wouldn't know because the one at Delphi fell down and is ruined. So, so they believed that people could do better. But they said, in order to do better, you have to take seriously how bad we can be. If you don't learn about the Holocaust, how are you going to avoid one? Right? Because the Germans didn't know they were going into a Holocaust. I've been reading Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem the last couple of weeks, and she makes the point clear that the reason that that extermination was so efficient wasn't because the Germans were so efficient. It was because the Jewish community leaders didn't believe that this was going to be extermination. They thought they were going to be exported and be able to have peaceful lives in Eastern Europe. So they organized their own communities to show up to the trains on time. They made lists of who all the Jews were and they gave them to the Nazis. They made lists of all the wealth and possessions owned by the Jews, since the only way you were given permission to leave was if you handed over all your goods. So they said, here's all our wealth, here's all our property, and they handed it to the Nazis. If they hadn't done that, if they had said, oh my God, they're coming to kill us, run for your lives and hide, escape, Hannah Arendt says the testimony of Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem makes clear the Nazis never could have killed 6 million Jews. They just couldn't have done it. But people were in denial about what was happening. They didn't believe people could be that bad. Even some people in the death camps were still walking around telling their Jewish friends, somebody's made a mistake. I'm one of the good Jews. I'm not supposed to be here. This can't be happening. I mean, maybe those other Jews deserve to die, but I'm one of the good ones. Why doesn't anybody understand? I need to find somebody in authority so I can tell them so they'll fix this. They didn't know what was happening. And it all comes from not taking seriously how bad people can be. But if you know how bad people can be, then you don't tell your people line up at the trains. You tell your people run for the hills, fight back, sabotage, get the hell out of here. So this is the Greek argument. You have to know how bad people can be so that you have a chance to do good.
Yeah, and then at the other extreme, look where we are technologically, for example. I mean, what other species can you think of could have done what human race has done? Here, we're having a Zoom meeting, we're going to the moon or whatever. I mean,
Yes.
the range to which human race can go
Huge.
bad or go good and go, to achieve all these incredible technological achievements or whatever. But and then also historically, when you think of these, horrible, horrible human beings like Hitler or Kim Jong-un or whatever, and you can count them maybe 50, 100 throughout history. But then there are all these other human beings who have lived a pretty peaceful life, more or less. I like to think,
Yeah. It's
trying,
the
trying to
point
be
you're making
positive.
about the range is important, right? That we can not only be so bad, we can also be so good. It's just as
Yeah.
important to tell stories about how good we can be so that people don't just fall for pessimism. Like Aristotle doesn't believe in pessimism, and he has plenty of reason to believe in it. I mean, he's writing after the Peloponnesian War. The Greeks have wrecked everything. And they've been conquered by the backwoods Macedonians. It's as though in the mid 20th century, people used to make jokes about hillbillies and their feuds up in the mountains. There's Bugs Bunny cartoons, right? Showing toothless hillbillies shooting at each other and unable to build anything worthwhile. To have the Macedonians conquer the Greeks is very much as though that caricature of a hillbilly came down out of the mountains and conquered America. And people would be like, "Oh my God, what is wrong with us?" I mean, it's not like we were beat by the Russians with their nukes. How did the Macedonians beat us? He's writing at a time when depression would be a perfectly reasonable response, but he's still not depressed. He's still saying what you're saying. There is an enormous range of possibilities for human behavior. And the lesson we have to take away from this is we have to take that range seriously, and we have to commit to doing everything we can to push the arc of the moral universe towards justice, as Martin Luther King Jr. would say thousands of years later, right? We have to. We know how bad it can get and we know how good it can get. And the good is worth fighting for. But we have to make the effort.
And
So
like
he's
in
with
this
you.
meeting, we're talking about good people like Aristotle or Plato or whatever. We don't talk about all these horrible people who, lived during the time of Aristotle, let's say,
Yeah.
So good has lasted longer than the bad, in terms of legends or what's the word I'm looking for? But anyway,
The myths.
good has over. But anyway,
No,
can't
it's
find the
fine,
word.
Jenny. I mean, everybody's bringing their own perspective, and so that's your perspective. And the ancient Greek perspective starts in pessimism and argues from the perspective of we have to do better than that. It's what I call meliorism. I didn't coin the term, but it's a word I wish was known as well as optimism and pessimism. Optimism believes everything is good. Pessimism believes everything is bad. And meliorism says, I don't know whether everything is good or bad, but I know we can do better than this. We can do better than this. It's worth trying. It's worth pushing for. That's meliorism. And I think that's probably where the Greeks come down. Before I call on Phineas, which I'm going to do in just a second, to kind of underscore this point about the Greeks, remember that Hesiod, the poet Hesiod, who should be as famous as Homer, but he's not. He wrote a lot of stuff that the Greeks respected and read all the time. In Works and Days, and his cosmology, he writes about the idea that there have been generations of human beings who are different from each other. And he starts with the Golden Age, and he goes to the Silver Age, and he goes down to the Bronze Age, which is the heroes of the Trojan War. And then he says it's followed by the Iron Age. And the Golden Age people were all happy and good. The Silver Age people weren't quite as smart and good and gifted, but they were good enough and smart enough, and they had a nice life too. Says the Bronze Age, though, even though these guys had virtues, it was a time of strife and struggle. I mean, they were warriors; they had to fight all the time to try to make good things happen, and we see how that turned out. And then he says, "Alas, there's no golden people, there's no silver people, there's no bronze people. All we have is iron people." And it's tough going trying to get these Iron Age people to behave well, to get them to believe in goodness and try. That's the framework within which people like Aristotle are saying, well, here's how we try. Here's how to do it. Here's how to try get better than the Iron Age and try to be a good human being. So that's the thing about their pessimism. It sounds pessimistic to us, but really it's melioristic. It says we've got a serious problem, but if we turn and face it, we should be able to do better than this, but we've got to turn and face it. That's the Greek argument in a nutshell. Phineas, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I'm wondering if this is related to where it could be that, yeah, some people, like humans, can be so evil that we should make sure that we're going in the good direction. But also, I feel like a big aspect is that even a really good human has big blind spots. We're just like, we can make big mistakes no matter what. So, um, I think that's a big aspect in this also, just being aware of our nature.
Yeah, that's critically important to this, and I'm sorry I didn't stress that. You're right, Phineas. It's from the Greek perspective. Our character offers us some gifts and some defects. Each person's character is different, right? And each culture has a different pattern of characters that the people in that culture tend to have. And it's our job to identify what our gifts are, cultivate those so we can do some good in the world, and to identify what our defects are and cultivate those to try to ameliorate them. And the analogy that I use on a lot of these calls is alcoholism because it's a personal thing. I mean, my family's been alcoholics for generations, and I just can't afford to touch a bottle. I can't afford to take the test. I don't want to know if I'm an exception because if I'm not an exception, I could wreck my entire life. We've got the gene, right? Other people can have a drink and I can't. That's just how it is. But if I recognize it and I take it seriously, right? And I say, yeah, Beverly, have a glass of wine and I will be having some apple juice. As long as we take it seriously, this defect doesn't have to define my life. It's only if I ignore it that it will define my life. This is this is, I think, to paraphrase what you said, Phineas, this is the Greek argument about character and how it works. This is why they say gnothi seaton. You got to learn what that character is so that you know what to do about it. So everybody's different, right? I wouldn't be surprised if on this call there's not a single other alcoholic and it's just me. Everybody has their own blind spots and their own issues, and those are the things they need to focus on. So, yeah.
I wish I could give you some of my genes, Rick, because I don't drink. I don't drink at all completely. I don't miss it not one bit. I never liked the taste of alcohol. So you can have some of my genes so that could help you.
Well, it's not entirely impossible. Should we do a 60 seconds of science? I don't know if you saw this week, a new study came out. They've been experimenting with using CRISPR to do gene editing on people with HIV. And they were able to gene edit out the HIV. Is that not amazing? Now, it's not available yet for, treatment. This has just been done in a laboratory setting. But they said when they were finished, that individual had no trace of HIV left in their body. So we're at a really exciting tipping point.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just in the news today, the 3 people who won the Nobel Prize, was it, in physiology? Did you see that?
No.
The 3 scientists who got, and they're doing all this work with, I think it is genetics that they're and they're working on, getting rid of cancer research and all that.
Yeah.
It's in the news.
It's immunology that they're working with. Well, I just wanted to go on for Rick, if I may just interrupt here. Huntington's disease, they've been able to get
that one too
through gene editing, 75% reduction in the progression of the symptoms. That's amazing.
That's amazing.
From gene editing, injecting a virus at some area in the brain and having that virus modify the DNA or the RNA. And it's a small study so far, but it's hopeful, very hopeful. It's just amazing, which is why when anybody say they want to reduce research, I get really anxious.
Yes. Because I'm with you. I feel like all our life we've sort of been waiting for a lot of these things to pay off. And now we're starting to get rapid, quick succession of studies that are succeeding. And it's hopeful. It's hopeful. So your offer that if only you could give me some of your non-alcoholic genes to replace my alcoholic ones, and that would improve my life, that might during our lifetime change from being hypothetical to being practical.
Another big area is the function of the immune system. And the 3 professors who got the Nobel Prize in medicine did work on the immune system. And the immune system protects us, but when you have autoimmune disease, when you have certain type of cancers, it works against your body. Well, now they think they've been able to identify a protein component that can impact the way the immune system behaves. And that's just so very, very exciting because there's people who have rheumatoid disease, rheumatoid arthritis, irritable bowel disease, and all those diseases do not have to be as devastating as they were. So it's very, very exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, Sharon, I wouldn't be here without stem cell transplant. So yeah, absolutely. A self stem cell transplant. Or I would not be here. I would be gone. Cancer would have taken me away. So I agree with you. I get very anxious when I hear about cutting research programs. It's like, no. Yeah, it's like, oh gosh, you can't do that.
Yeah.
But this is so fascinating. So yeah, Jenny, there are good people.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the YouTube right now. Mary Bronkow, Fred Ramdell, and Shimon Sakaguchi won the Nobel Prize in Medicine on Monday today. Discoveries concerning peripheral immune tolerance.
Nice.
Okay, so
nice.
It's in the yeah.
Well, after today's seminar, that'll be my reading. I'll go to YouTube and check out the research. I'm excited. Anyway, so I was just to emphasize, part of why this is relevant, why I wanted to take our minute of science here before calling on Stephen is that what you're underscoring is one of the most important points about the Greek concept of character, which is that there are parts of your character you can change through practice and habit, right? Like honesty. You can learn to be more honest. But there are parts that are part of your physiognomy, like your genetics, like if you've got the Huntington's gene. And until these breakthroughs are happening, it has always been the case that part of what you have to do is learn which of your character defects are malleable and which are not, because some of them won't be. But the ones that are genetic in our generation might gradually be shifting out of the category of things you can't change and into the category of things we might be able to change. And all of this, none of this refutes the Greek concept of character. It underscores it. It's like, yeah, if you can cultivate those parts of your character, you really need to. Because, boy, getting rid of Huntington's disease, talk about quality of life improvement. I mean, Huntington's is a killer. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
So just going to counter Jenny's opinion that it's just a minority of people are bad. No, it's a minority of people who've gotten the power to be bad. There's this whole sort of move in modern thought to say, people like Adolf Hitler, they're some specially bad type of human being. But you look at the young Hitler, that wasn't there. The young Hitler didn't go around being particularly nasty to anybody. He was actually, if you went into the DOS house, he was fairly intelligent. You could have a good conversation with him. He's even saying he even, was friends with a Jew. And the other Germans in the DOS house are saying, how dare you be friends with a Jew? And he said, oh, well, the Jews are cultured and intelligent. And it sounds like it's taking a bit out of Nietzsche that the Germans were a bit crude because he read a lot of books. And, he had a friend and the friend said, well, he's a bit resentful and he could be a bit angry and a bit obstinate and all that, but he was my friend. He could be fairly interesting sort of guy. That was a young Hitler. That's a Hitler without power. He could be living next door to you and he's probably never going to really create a problem for you. But then one day Hitler gets the power. And this is a warning to the Christian church, isn't it? Temptation. You think you're the good person above temptation. I love that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, this is what Nietzsche says. He says power makes stupid. He doesn't say power corrupts. He says power makes stupid. So when people get more power, they use it as a shortcut to solve their problems. Right? When you don't have power, you might have to talk to people. But if you have a whole army at your disposal, you could just shoot the guy if he angers you. Right? There's a way in which this kind of I have a friend of mine on Facebook has been using the word brutalitarian, and it's what happens with power is it gets so easy to just squish problems because of your power that when you're impatient and frustrated, you reach for the easy solution rather than the more difficult one of I have so much to do. Do I really want to spend 3 weeks arguing with this guy? Why don't I just censor him? So we don't know until we've been put to the test. And this is one of the Greek points about character. We don't fully know our own character until we've been put to the test, given the power, put into the situation to find out what all's in us. And it's why they encourage us when we don't have power to learn as much as we can and cultivate as much as we can, so that should the opportunity arise, Kairos, the season when suddenly things are firing on all cylinders for us, we want to make sure that when that happens, we've already done a lot of the work on ourselves to be cautious about the parts of ourselves that are not good. In a way, it's what the art of tragedy is about, is saying you don't fully know what's in your character until you're put into the situation. And this is where Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem underscores what Stephen's saying, because what Arendt got in trouble with the Jewish community for saying was something that was true, but that nobody wanted to hear. When they put Eichmann on trial, they were hoping they'd captured a monster, frothing at the mouth, relentlessly hating Jews and anti-Semitic. And instead, they got a squib. I mean, he's, as she says early on in her observations to one of her friends before she starts writing her column, it's weird listening to Eichmann. It's like he's stupid. You're like, somehow not, but also somehow he is. And weirdly, he doesn't seem to have any convictions. Like you expect to find Dracula or Vlad the Impaler, someone twisting their mustache. You don't expect to find a frustrated middle manager who was more concerned about whether he got a raise. And who also couldn't seem to keep his story clear about whether he liked Jews or didn't like Jews, whether he tried to save them or ship them off. And it's like it didn't matter to him. And that's what she concludes. He has no empathy. It mattered a lot to him whether he got a promotion, whether people admired him. And that's how he got caught in Argentina, as he went around bragging about things he didn't even do. He wanted people to, admire him. And since his friends were Nazis, he bragged about Nazi stuff. And then the word got out, and Israel found him, and they took him to trial. They said, okay, we have the monster. And then he starts opening his mouth, and the prosecutors, the judges, aren't, everybody's just sitting there going, who is this fucking clown? This is the man who shipped millions of Jews off to their death, and he doesn't even care? I mean, there's other Nazis who are clearly frothing at the mouth monsters. They're on the record about how much they hate the Jews, but they weren't the ones who organized the trains so efficiently and got so many people so fast to the death camps. It was this weird blank of a human being. She says, it's weird. He can't remember his own life except for the times that were really cool, either because he got a promotion or because he was frustrated in getting a promotion. He can't remember the people in his life except for the ones that he gave orders to, or who were above him and said something favorable about him. He remembers those moments crystal clear. But in his own defense, as she says in Eichmann in Jerusalem, there are specific things he was accused of, not the main crimes he was accused of by the court, but along the way there were things people accused him of doing that he didn't actually do, and that there is evidence and there's witnesses who can point out, no, he didn't actually do that, but he couldn't remember them. He didn't even try to defend himself in those times. He just sort of shrugged and said, oh well. And his defense attorneys and people are looking at each other like going, but we know it was this other guy who did that thing because he's on the record and there were 17 witnesses, and in the Nuremberg trials they all said, how come you aren't at least saying? And the answer is, he couldn't remember. This is how much of an impression it made on him to ship all these people to their death. It's like he was sleeping.
Something I might add, and that's that tale, Wolfram von Essenbach's tale of the Holy Grail. Oh, Percival, yes, Percival. And the bad guy in it, Klinzor, who's in Wagner's opera, became evil because he wanted to be good. He thought he was a good person. I want to scale the heights of goodness. But the result somehow is he became the baddest dude around. So bad that even some of the other bad dudes had to fight against him.
Yeah. That's a classic example. And it's Eschenbach. The Germans should know this stuff. But instead, here's Eichmann, who doesn't know what a virtue is. He thinks, he literally says, following the Führer's orders is the highest possible good. And he did that. So why are you all angry at me? I don't understand even why I'm on trial. Because, I mean, to the best of he says, I'm not going to sit here and lie and pretend I didn't do these things. He says, I have contempt for the Nazis who all turned on each other and lied about what they did, because they're liars. You got to be honest and forthright. He says, I'm honest and forthright. I followed the orders. That's what you're supposed to do. That was the law. And he thinks that's good. Morally, he's incompetent. In terms of his memory, he's incompetent. Emotionally, in terms of empathy, he's incompetent. And that's all we get. We after all those deaths, we don't get to drive a wooden stake into the heart of Dracula. Instead, we're stuck with this schmo. And as Arendt says, I mean, he has to die. He's done terrible, horrible things on a massive scale. But there's something gross about having it all come down to such a milquetoast mediocrity. And where this is relevant, why am I so excited about saying this after what Stephen said about Hitler and after what Jenny said, is Arendt's point on this is nobody would have suspected that a man like this would do things like this. Even he wouldn't have suspected. It wasn't until he was put into the situation. And then the defects in his character, which would not have mattered very much if he was living an ordinary life as a postman, say, suddenly became life or death to millions of people. The little blind spot that doesn't matter in ordinary life becomes critically important when your power is raised. And that's the lesson of all Greek tragedy. If Oedipus had stayed a shepherd in the hills, everything would have been fine. I mean, everything. He wouldn't have killed his father. He wouldn't have married his mother. Thebes would not have been afflicted by the Sphinx and by the miasma. All of this stuff happened because he was put into a heroic position that his character couldn't actually support. So the Greeks say, you better check out your character. And Nietzsche says, and you better be careful what you say yes to when people offer you power. Stay at the level that your character will allow, and you can be a good person. Don't rise to the level that your character can't handle. And it's why when Ginny says to me on other calls, I wish you could be president, Rick, my answer is always, oh God, no. I mean, I would be a disaster. And the way I know is most people would be a disaster. I'm no exception. The role of president is problematic to put that much power.
I'd be happy to be president, but are the Americans up to my standards to rule?
Now you sound like Groucho Marx. I don't want to be a member of this club. Phineas, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I was thinking of a way of rewording the power creates stupid is power amplifies stupid. Because like I feels like it's an amplification. Like the stupidity was there sort of the whole time, but if you have infinite resources, you can do a lot more damage. And then I guess an example to highlight that, just because it's kind of funny, is I saw like a seagull like bullying a whole bunch of other seagulls, or like 100 seagulls all chilling, and then there's this one seagull picking fights with all the other seagulls. It was so out of place, and it looked like it had a bit of brain damage. Like it was just like going around attacking other seagulls. But like worst thing it could possibly do was just go mess with those other seagulls. It had nothing beyond that. Whereas a human with an army, it's like obviously if he has a bit of brain damage, it's a whole nother game.
Yes. See, that's brilliant. And this also meant I think Sharon had her hand up, but put it down. So I'm gonna say a Sharon thing to see if I can provoke her into putting her hand back up. This issue of differential character, that we've all got different characters and they can all handle different situations and not handle other different situations. This is the classic example is if somebody needs to administer anesthesia to someone in this group, I want it to be Sharon. She spent a whole career doing that. I think she knows what she's doing. Her defects of character are such that they don't interfere with her ability to be a great anesthesiologist. By contrast, I absolutely do not want me handing out anesthesia to anybody in this group. I do not know what I'm doing. And I can be sure that my defects of character would just play badly in that scenario. Even if someone handed me an instruction book, my defects of character would get in the way of being able to do something useful there. Everybody, to the extent to which we've got good qualities in our character and bad qualities in our character, each of us has certain niches in which we can thrive and be healthy and do good in the world. And we've got other niches in which it would be a disaster for us to occupy that niche. And usually there's a lot of disasters. You don't want me as a plumber. You don't want me as a surgeon. You don't want me as a lawyer. It's a very long list. There's a very small number of things that I'm competent to do. And there's a somewhat larger number of less important things that I can stumble through and manage without causing too much damage. And I think that's the case for most of us. The moderns idealize, Kenneth uses this term protean after the god Proteus, who was a shape-shifting god. You might remember in the Odyssey, I think it is, maybe it's in one of the others, where the hero has to wrestle Proteus to the ground and not let him escape so that Proteus will tell him a critical answer. I think it's Odysseus. I think it has to do with how to open up the gates to Hades. And Proteus knows because he's a god, but Proteus doesn't want to tell because this is immortal. Why should he blab to immortal? And Proteus just changes shape from one thing to another, a dragon, a serpent, all kinds of things. And the guy just hangs on and won't let him change. So this notion of Proteanism is something people don't have. We can't be all things. We can't be anything. We can't be infinitely adaptable. Each of us has our strengths and weaknesses. This is the Greek concept. Each of us has our strengths and weaknesses, the things we're good at, the things we're not. And we can change slowly over time through cultivation of our character, but not rapidly. And we won't live long enough to be able to change into everything. But the modern world tells us you can be all you can be. You can be anything you want to be. Just pursue the dream. It says there are no constraints on what you can be. Go for your dream. Disney cartoons say this all the time. Heroes in Disney cartoons sing songs about their heart and their longings and their dream. And the lesson is, yes, go forth and pursue the thing. But the Greeks would be sitting there shaking their heads going, no, man, figure out what you're made of. And then choose an appropriate dream for that. If you've got the gift of music, sure, go for it. But if you're tone deaf, maybe not. Maybe you should pursue a different dream. Figure out what you've got to work with. Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I just wanted to kind of amplify this point about good people and not so good people, because I think that, to my mind, reflects the business of determinism, free will, and choice, right? And the Greek society, I think, came up with the way they were going to function based on their philosophical wisdom. And as the Christian society was getting established, they had the 10 Commandments. And if you know, the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament is all about the laws and the way a society was going to behave ethically and in a manner that they could live together. So I think it's all about choice. And the Christian religion gave you a set of rules to follow, and it's up to you, right? Where I think, to my impression, the Greek society, it was also about choice, but it was defined by the society itself as it evolved over time. So can you comment on that?
Yes. Yes. And part of what we're seeing, you're right on. And part of what we're seeing in this is the difference between a civilization at its birth and a civilization at its late corrupt stage. Because at its birth, it's an exciting time to be alive. Possibilities are exploding all over the place. Your choices really matter. There's upward mobility, there's sideways mobility. Someone who was born a slave might become a preacher or a saint. You don't know what's going to happen because everything's in turmoil. There's opportunities for change. But the problem is, as the society flourishes and its grip strengthens on the world, it eventually creates the problems that it's blind to, that it can't see. And it doesn't, if anybody tries to bring those to its attention, it doesn't want to fix those problems. Because during the flourishing period, you have invested in the status quo. People have enormous amounts of money and power dependent on not changing things. And just because something's a problem and lots of people suffer doesn't mean the guy who's a billionaire wants you to mess with it. Because if you mess with it, he might lose his billions. So this is what happens in the flourishing and late flourishing period, and it leads to the end period, which is where the ossification, the disadvantages of the ossification and the problems that are mounting up grow beyond the advantages of the epoch, and until it becomes like hell on earth. And during that stage, there's almost always not just ossification of the willingness to solve problems, but there's ossification in social mobility. And because of that, there's a lot more pessimism and despair. And it's harder for people to convince themselves that they should work on their character when, after all, my biggest problem in life is this asshole governor who's taxing me to death. Like in Rome, the early Roman Empire, the taxes were, taxes, and that wasn't good, but you could still make a living. But by the late Roman Empire, the taxes are just killing everybody because they're just, the governors are so corrupt. All they can think about is how to extract as much wealth as fast as possible out of these provinces. It's no longer a functional system. And so when that's happening in your life, or let's say the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, whatever you might have wanted to do to advance your character when you were living in Africa, your priorities change when you're chained up inside of a slave ship. Now you'd like to fucking, kill these guys and free all the slaves. And if you don't do that, you're going to be in massive trouble. And if somebody went through that group of people who were thinking about how can we save our lives and get our freedom back and said, you know what, I think we ought to be working on is improving our own character, they'd be forgiven for throwing that guy overboard. These are not the priorities right now. The priority is saving this, solving this existential problem that's suffocating us. So this is how it works. Each epoch has its time early on when it's very hopeful about the possibilities of change and improvement and social mobility. But also each epoch has its time late when that very same epoch has become so corrupt and ossified that it's very hard for people to address these issues, because they're so stuck and they're so pressured. And that stuckness and pressure becomes the motive force for the revolution that ends an epoch. It's because the founding fathers of the medieval world could succeed the way they could because it's not like there was anybody who thought this was working. It's like they had a ready audience of, everyone. Literally everyone is like, this sucks. Even the emperors are like, I don't know how long I'm going to be emperor before I get deposed and someone cuts my head off. This sucks. This is awful. In those circumstances, at the very end of an epoch, everything's ripe for change. Everything's ripe for change. And then you get the new revolutionary period with its new hope.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. It's a great question, Sharon. So I'm going to pull a Sharon and take us back to the text. How you like them apples? So we did the first sentence. What are we? We're an hour and a half into today's session, and we've done one sentence. And for those of you who are new to these seminars, it's not that we always only do one sentence in that amount of time, but we've done it before, and we'll do it again. So let's see if we can make it two sentences. So Kenneth continues. They learned instead of naively assuming that God had nothing better to do than fix all of our problems for us, men learned instead that religion offers men a quintessentially contrarian wisdom, contrarian, in opposition to their naive desires. So far is God from meting out beneficence to the good and suffering to the evil, that God seems in his omnipotence to be the one who designs souls to be good or bad in the first place. And before I go on, this is one of the central problems in the medieval form of Christianity. Now, many post-medieval forms of Christianity have addressed this and solved it. And as Ari's pointed out, the problem that's being discussed here isn't a problem that Judaism had, because they didn't say our God is in charge of everything and all good and all knowing and all powerful and everywhere. Because if you say that, then the problem is, well, then where does evil come from? And the Jews didn't have that problem. But the medieval Christians did have that problem because they insisted their God is the best God. He's better than all the other gods. He's perfect. And he's only good. And then people looked around at their world and the bad stuff happening. And they said, well, then where's all this coming from? Right? And when it comes to character, it's the same thing. If God knows all and is all powerful and he created everything, then if I'm an alcoholic, God made me that way. That doesn't seem right. How come I got stuck with alcoholism? What the hell is God thinking? Does God want me to fail? Does God think, hey, Donald deserves to go to heaven, but that Rick guy sucks. I'm going to make him an alcoholic. Screw you, Rick. This is the kind of thing people are starting to wonder, right? As they think through the medieval theology, they're struggling with this question of, well, where does evil come from? And and now alluding to what Sharon said, do I have free will? Or have I got the short end of the stick? For the next 1,000 years, you're going to be seeing different writers have different answers to this question, but everybody's wrestling with it. It's the inevitable problem that's raised by the structure of the theology. It's a big problem. It's the biggest problem. Why does my life suck? Where does all this evil come from? How come Bob over there is angry all the time? He's always been angry. He'll never stop being angry. Half the problems in his life are caused because he's a jerk who's angry all the time. How come God made him so angry that he can't have a healthy conversation with his neighbors? These are what they're wrestling with, right? So Kenneth continues, some have health, some misery. Because the medievals believed in inequity. They could see it. As it says in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, there goes the king. How do you know he's the king? Because he doesn't have shit all over him. We all have shit all over us. He's the only guy who doesn't. He must be the king. Some have health and some have misery. Inequality is just an obvious fact of life in the medieval world. There's no comparison between, some people and others. He says some are born to inestimable wealth, some to destitution. But God is presumed to be the omnipotent will behind all arrangements and circumstances, be they boons or tribulations. And this is where Kenneth starts to get to his core point here. All things bear some divine meaning. Nothing is mere or pure accident. In a world in which God is all powerful and all knowing and made everything, there can't be any accidents. All of this must be part of the plan somehow. And so you start to get these discussions of God's ineffable plan. I wonder what the hell the plan is. That was that, Bob ought to be angry all the time. How does this work? What is this adding up to? Praying and now we get into sort of a more modern take on theology, sort of the response to medievalism. And this take didn't start in the modern epoch. It started during the medieval era. There were saints and nuns and mystics who figured this out fairly early on, including some of the church fathers. Praying to get what men want is nothing but infantile folly in humans. When we look at the way the world is, it doesn't make sense to say, I pray that God lets my team win and that the other team loses. That's just not just. It doesn't make sense. And I can't pray that a volcano's not going to go off. It's going to go off whether I pray or not, right? But instead, men should pray instead for the wisdom to understand and appreciate what they have already been dealt. Everyone has something to work with, and everybody has some struggles. And what we want is the wisdom to understand, what does it mean that we are in this situation? And what would be the best way, the wisest way, the kindest way for us to proceed from here? There's a multitude of possible hands we could be dealt. But no matter how bad the hand is, we all have to play. So the question is, what's the right thing to do now? There must be something. There must be better and worse, even in the worst situations. There are better things to do and worse things to do. So what are the better things to do? Help me find the wisdom to chart a path forward through these problems, rather than, yelling at God. How dare you give me problems when I prayed for good things? I didn't want a little red wagon. I prayed for a BB gun. The childish version of prayer is like God is Santa Claus, and if he doesn't give you exactly what you want, well, then God's been naughty. And the more sophisticated version is understanding that, we don't get control over what's been handed to us, but we can strive to be wiser and kinder. We can strive for insight and, some kind of revelation. The paragraph wraps up as follows, and then we can talk about it. There's a lot of juicy stuff here. Kenneth says, some lives find themselves so accursed that, like Job, they have to wonder if God is not looking for their breaking point, tempting them to curse him and turn away from him. And yet they cannot ascribe malevolence to this God by his very concept, which is all good. So that can't be the reason that Job gets all those troubles. There must be some other reason. And I wonder what it is. And I should search for it and search for what to do with what's been handed to me. And we'll come up with Stephen's thing in a moment. Theodicy. Theodicy. If you've heard theology, if you were an atheist, you might not have heard the word theodicy. But theodicy is vitally important. From the Greek decay or justice. And by the way, for those of you who wonder about parallels between ancient Greek religion and Taoism, F.M. Cornford says, the Tao is analogous to decay, divine justice. That is real justice, the justice of nature and the gods. That is the way of Tao. It's why things work the way they do in the world. So theodicy is inquiring into God's relationship to good and bad, his justice in the world, and trying to understand how is it just that one person was dealt $1 billion and somebody else can't even feed their children. The understanding that, exploring that, wrestling with that, figuring out what is it that we can do with the hand we've been dealt to try to be just people who live up to the best possibilities in the hand, even if we don't see them at first. This is all part of theodicy. So from the Greek, decay or justice is the branch of theology that seeks, in Milton's words, to justify the ways of God to man, to help people make their peace with being dealt a bad hand, and not just settling into frustration and reviling God, but moving past that to the point of saying, okay, there must still be some good here that can be made of this situation. And that's what I want to find, the good that can be done. Kenneth says, it is a priori axiomatic that the Christian God's very desires and acts are definitive of justice. Right? He's good, he's just. To God's dispensations, we should say no more than yes or no, said Jesus in Matthew 5:37. Right? This is what God's handed out. So it's not our job to say, God, you asshole, why would you do that? It's our job to say, he must have his reasons. And so the question is, where do we go from here? Yes, I accept that this is what's happening. So now I have to figure out what to do. He says, we should say no more than yes or no, said Jesus, but merely align our understanding and will with his. Find the path to the good and the just that lies within our circumstances. Thus do our finite purposes, as mortals, right? We can't see the whole picture. We're finite. Thus do our finite purposes nest in God's infinite purpose. Now, I'm going to call on Sharon in just a second. But the one thing I want to underscore about all this is how much Greek philosophy there is in this. The Greek thing about character, you can't choose what your character is. But if you accept what your character is and you're honest with yourself about it, you can do something about it. You can work on your character and change your circumstances. You know, part and parcel that this is lost by the time of the late Roman Empire when people are just frustrated with their lot in life. But early on during the Greek period, it's still a fundamental part of Greek philosophy and religion that it's not fatalistic. Yes, you have no control over the hand you've been dealt. And yes, your character is your fate. You are going to be restricted to noticing and caring about the things your character tells you to notice or care about. But it's not deterministic because your character is malleable. If you are honest with yourself about your character, if you cultivate it, you can change your character. And by changing your character, you can change your fate. So there's no profit in giving up. There's no point in doing that. The point is to understand and find the way forward. This is very analogous, isn't it, to what we're seeing here in paragraph 8, where the issue is, yeah, some people are dealt a shitty hand in life. But what you're supposed to do next is not just say, oh, well, I guess it sucks to be me. There's more to life than being a sad sack. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be frustrated. We all are. It's a human thing. But we don't stop there. We continue on and say, okay, this is a crappy hand. Let me study it and figure out exactly why is it crappy and how is it crappy and where are the little gems in it. Somewhere in here is something to be worked with. Maybe I really am born in a terrible place, and the way I play this hand is I leave. I go somewhere else because not everywhere is the same. Or maybe the hand that I've been dealt is, yeah, I'm just a mediocre person, but I like to learn. And if I learn and practice, I don't have to be a mediocre person anymore. I can become good at some things. And they might be things I can't even suspect based on the level of mediocrity I have at the moment. But I'll never know until I try. And if I try, I may discover maybe I've got a gift for math. I should be an accountant. I mean, who knows? Somewhere in here is something to work with. The odds are. This Christian idea is very analogous to that concept of character in the ancient Greek world. And the reason is that the church fathers were Hellenized Jews. They were raised within a Greco-Roman education. All of these assumptions came naturally to them. So when they wanted to build a theology, including a theodicy, it was natural for them to transpose that earlier Greek concept of the malleability of character onto the malleability of the hand you've been dealt and fate, and see in that the possibility to see that what God has given you is in fact just. Sharon, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
2 points I wanted to make. I want to go back a little bit when you're talking about prayer. You said praying to get what you want is nothing but the infantile folly in humans. In my estimation, prayer is a way of transference, right? To deal with the chaos, right? It's nothing folly about it. It's a way of taking away the anxiety from yourself, because everything is totally out of your control. So if you can give it to somebody else, and that's a component of faith. Now, the second point I wanted to make is when you have really bad things happen to you in life, like Job, and you say, well, what are you thinking? And you just made a very important point that it has to do with building of character, because Greeks were the people who wrote the book, the New Testament, were Hellenized Jews. And so here's it in James that says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. That's building character. And that's one of the episodes of Sophrosyne that you see in the New Testament. And they are Hellenized Jews, and they brought up Greek. So they put a lot of it in the New Testament. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's given that Latin was the language of the medieval church, many people don't realize that none of the New Testament was written in Latin originally. It was all written in Greek. I mean, it wasn't written in Hebrew or Aramaic either. It was Greek. From the first book of the New Testament to the last. Greek, 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 Greek. That was the language these guys spoke. And some of them, as a point that Kenneth and biblical historians have made, some of the Hellenized Jews who created Christianity couldn't even speak Hebrew. They never had. That's how Hellenized they were. In the Roman world, it was hit or miss whether you're going to be in the right place and right time to immerse yourself in the Hebrew language and the Hebrew worldview. And it's possible that the reason that Christianity caught on and spread the way that it did was precisely because by the late Roman Empire, so many people couldn't speak Hebrew but were immersed in Greek. And so by taking Hebrew concepts and Hellenizing them, the early Christians managed to make as marketers would say today, a taste sensation that was irresistible to the public. So it's there, and the result is that there, as Sharon's pointing out, there is a certain amount of Greek philosophy hiding inside of Christian theology.
So I got another quick question. Were these Hellenized Jews also not Romans?
They were.
So therefore they were able to, they helped to spread Christianity just by their nationality. They were Romans, so therefore they were not subject to so much persecution.
So Latin,
yes
Latin's
or no? I don't know.
Latin's the dominant language in the Western Roman Empire, but in the Eastern Roman Empire, Greek remains the dominant language. I mean, Byzantium, the Jerusalem, Egypt. I mean, all of the stuff to the east, they're all speaking Greek all the time, even though they're in the Roman Empire. And weirdly, that continues through almost all of the Middle Ages until the fall of Constantinople, until the Turks, conquer all that land and eventually take, Byzantium, Constantinople. It's Greek speaking in the East. So you get this weird schism that in the early medieval period isn't even an issue because originally all the books are in Greek. But by the late medieval period, or even the mid-medieval period, it's a gigantic issue. The two versions of medieval Christianity are drifting apart from each other because they're speaking different languages. And the language of the Romans has an imperial worldview, whereas the language of the Greeks has this older philosophical worldview. And so the way that they interpret Jesus and his message and what we're supposed to do begins to drift further and further apart. It all starts with, I guess, Jerome in the Vulgate when he translates the Greek New Testament into Latin. And at first, that's just, entertaining and a curiosity and used by a minority of people. But after one of the big fights, here's like I said, we would start to do a little medieval history in the second year of the medieval period. Here's a little history, right? Even after he translates into Latin in the Vulgate, it's still the Greek that's the dominance that's being used in church services right up until there's an argument between the Pope and a patriarch of the Eastern Church. And the Pope is not having it. And so he says, forget it. We're not going to do Greek anymore. We're going to do Latin. Jerome, where's your Vulgate? We're gonna do Latin services. Screw those Greeks. And that's the point at which the theology of the East and West really starts to separate. And as we'll see, that becomes an issue when we have the Crusades, including the one that sacks Constantinople. It's an issue with endless fight. Actually, it's even earlier than that. It's an issue that starts the Crusades. When the Greeks have to call on the Romans for help, because otherwise the Romans didn't know what the hell was going on in the East. And they split into two semi-separated worlds. And to this day, it's why the Roman Catholic Church does Latin and the Eastern Orthodox Church does Greek. The Eastern Orthodox, which people in Western Europe and the United States think of as an interesting curiosity. It's that other one that we don't know as much about. And we assume that the Latin being spoken by the Roman Catholic Church is the more normal, right? That's the more normal church. It's speaking Latin. But Latin's the weird thing, not Greek. It was all Greek up until that fight when the Pope said, forget it, we're getting rid of Greek. So actually, it's the Western Church that we're all used to. That's the weird one. They are internalizing the Roman perspective and worldview into their form of Christianity. It's fascinating. But there's one other thing I want to mention before I call on Stephen, as part of my gratitude to Sharon. I want to note your first point, which is that yes, the praying for goodies, which lots of people do, is not the kind of prayer that the mystics and saints and nuns and most insightful medieval Christians want you to do. They want you to pray the way Sharon said. Pray for understanding about helping to bear these burdens that you have. Pray for even just saying it out loud and acknowledging that it's a problem does good things for your character. So you're not suffering from the Freudian, evils of repression and suppression. You're turning and facing your problems by saying them in your prayer. And likewise, you can say how you wish the world was, not to say, Santa, give me a sled, but so that you have said it out loud. And it helps you to visualize the better conditions that you wish that you had. And it helps you to clarify the difference between the bad conditions you have now and the good conditions you wish you had. And that clarity can help you to find a way through. It can help you to find a path to make things better in a way that you can't find if you've been denying what you want out of pessimism, or if you've been denying your problems out of optimism. The key to meliorism is to see both sides and find the route. And this is what Sharon's talking about, right? That's what you were saying, is there's that the prayer can be used in that wise way to chart a path. So I want to underscore that, because it's not just Sharon saying that. You're going to find a lot of medieval people saying that. And all of this is kind of the background for what Kenneth is writing here. So thank you, Sharon. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, that Greek curse, I can't quite remember all the circumstances of it, but the implication is that if we're granted our desires, we're probably going to destroy ourselves. There was an episode of Red Dwarf when Rick, they land on the planet where your dreams become reality. And Rick, of course, comes up with all the lamest of ideas. He's living a curse. And this is it. It seems to be, you think, when you've grown a bit older and you think about all the things you've experienced and wanted, and you realize if you had been given the choice to get everything you want, you would create a lame existence. Well, it's a bit like a rock star, he's very wealthy, can have everything he wants. He starts throwing rocks through his TV set, starts taking drugs, and he's miserable. He's granted what he wants. So there's, the point of prayer is you pray for guidance. And that's very strongly my belief. I don't think human beings without divine help can really come up with a great scenario. I'm not saying that human beings can't contribute to their own well-being. They can, but I don't think they absolutely, given absolute power, what's going to become of you? I would mention that I do have a mystical belief. I believe that when you pray, there are spirits that help you. I don't purely view it as something psychological. For example, I believe that that dead humans come down to help people that pray. That's just a mystical belief of mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And what's interesting about this is that it can
I think you're right, Stephen.
It can work exactly the same way, whether there are supernatural spirits or whether, according to the Greeks, there are only natural spirits. Because the Greeks, remember, have that idea that human character is designed to seek out states of possession, to be possessed by other spirits. And a spirit can be as simple as, I watched Star Wars and I watched Luke Skywalker persevere, and that spirit of his character and his striving has inspired me to strive as well. And before I rewatched Star Wars, I'd given up. But then and here I'm using a naturalistic concept of spirit. That encounter with that spirit changed me. And the Greeks say, yeah, that's how we're wired. Unlike any other animal, we're the one that has states of enthusiasm, and theos, the God within, in which daimons can inspire us. Like, how many times have I been driving on my way to somewhere and there's a sudden gap in the trees and I see a mountain, and I was talking, but now I stop talking and I just stare. It's like, my God, that's beautiful. This is the Greek thing, that we are, unless we armor ourselves against this specific circumstance, we are prone, we're ready, we're open to be possessed by other ideas and possibilities, especially if we don't like the one we have. And the one that we see looks so much better than ours. So for some people, it could be reading the stories of Harriet Tubman. And, you could be frustrated and give up and feel hopeless. And then you read about, well, she had nothing. And still she was able to smuggle her way back into the slave lands and find people and smuggle them back out to freedom. And that she did it over and over and over with nothing. And you think, well, God, I've got more than that to work with. If she could do that, what should I be able to do? For some people it's a movie or a poem, or it's like Donald says, Kenneth says. For some people it is, you see the example of someone living an heuristic life, if you're living in ancient Greece, and you say, wow, I had other goals, but now that I see that person, forget those other goals. I want to become an Aristos. I got to follow them around and see how this works. And this prayer, part of what's interesting about prayer, whether it's, and I'm not saying it's not supernatural. What I'm saying is, it, according to the ancient Greeks, from their perspective, this could work the same way, regardless of whether the spirit that we're possessed by is a natural spirit or a supernatural spirit. In either way, it sort of underscores the importance of prayer, because prayer in this concept is a state of openness in which you say, being closed and willful is not working for me. I need to have a dialogue in which I'm open to new possibilities. And in that dialogue, I have to be rigorously honest about what my problem is that I'm facing and about what I wish things were like. And if we're open, then that openness improves the odds that we're going to be possessed by a better idea. Whether it comes from our ancestors, literally, which it might, many people think it does, or whether it comes from our memories of our ancestors that live on inside of us, but that we've been drowning out with our willfulness all day long, until finally in this quiet moment of prayer, that little voice inside of us, our grandma's voice, says, "Hi, so you're open, sweetie. You want to hear something? I've got a good idea. Do you remember how we used to deal with these problems?" And you'd forgotten. And at that moment you go, "Oh, she's right. Grandma's right. I need to listen to grandma. Why haven't I been listening to grandma?" Works the same either way. We get enormous creative juice out of opening ourselves up to new possibilities and being honest. And this is what Kenneth's talking about here. However it works, whatever the mechanism, this does an enormous amount for us. At least this is certainly the medieval Christian concept of prayer. Now, other people have other concepts of prayer. Other religions have other concepts of prayer. And at some point we'll want to explore those too. But this is kind of what's on the docket here for today, because this is the paragraph we have to wrestle with. So why don't we go on to paragraph 9? See, we might have taken half the time to only go through a certain sentence, but this is how it works for us, isn't it? Because once we struggle through the difficult part that's full of juice, it then frees us up to move more quickly through the other things that depend on that idea. So, yeah, and it's why the Greeks thought storytelling was sacred, right? The theater is the temple of Dionysus. That's where the invisible nature within us is brought out and made visible on the stage, so that we can hear the conversation that normally we don't hear, that's inside of us, and go, is that what I'm thinking? I didn't realize until this very moment when I said it out loud that that's what I'm thinking. And now that I see it, maybe I want to do something different. So Kenneth continues, Jesus speaks of the kingdom of God and pointedly tells his hearers they should not look for it to manifest itself in this world, not literally in this world. He goes on, let me paste the rest of this. There's a break here. He goes on, the kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, lo here, or lo there. For behold, and this is one of the best moments in Luke, isn't it? The kingdom of God is within you. The power that the medievals are wanting to unleash on the world to put an end to the fatalism and the frustration and the corruption of the late Roman Empire, they're saying, you don't need the Roman legions to change the world. You don't need imperial piles of gold or silver to change the world. If you can be honest with yourself and open to new possibilities, then you can change yourself. And in so doing, you create the possibility of helping others to change too. And that's the kingdom of God. That's how it will be brought about, is through our refusal to settle for the old certainties that have us mired in a hopeless, moribund, ossified, corrupt system of government. That we can set aside our certainties, that that's the only way and the best way, and nobody's ever done better, and nobody ever will do better. All the propaganda that the late Roman Empire and the late medieval church and sort of late modernity, they all say the same thing. Hope for nothing better. People suck. People are off. And this is where I'm going to echo Ginny. Say there is an enormous danger in accepting the proposition that as bad as things are, nothing could possibly be better. This is it. This is human nature. Suck it up. That's an enormous danger. Because the truth is, there are few things worse than the way people relate to each other at the end of an epoch. That's the time of corruption. Even that same epoch, just a few centuries before, was so much better. So much better before it rotted and ossified and got corrupt. And sometimes it's in people's own lifetimes. I remember when the United States had public health service hospitals. When I was a kid, I was treated by doctors who were operating with public health service funding. That's right. I got my first vaccinations, right? But now in this country, we pretend it's impossible. And nobody could possibly have a public health service. Everything. We should need to shut down all government funding for healthcare because it's impossible. Can't be done. Sorry, we're broke. And the fact that every other industrialized country but ours has managed to do it, we don't care. When you get stuck in a difficult epoch, one of the things that happens is people get into this competition to prove who's more mature, who's more grown up. And by grown up, they mean pessimistic. Who's tougher? Who's more negative? And then they mock anybody who says things could be better than this. You're a utopian. What? You think the US could have a public health service? What a utopian. As though we didn't already have one just 50 years ago. As though that never happened. As though it were impossible. I know it's possible. I was there at the time. I'm not interested in arguments to say, that's so utopian. It's like, that's the opposite of a utopia. That's reality. But in a time like this, it's just so easy to play the game of who can be meaner, who can be more negative, who can claim that people can't ever amount to anything more than this. And the problem with that is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The problem with depression, the problem with pessimism, all of these things are a race to the bottom. Because after all, if it's hopeless, then why make any effort to fix things? And if you don't make any effort to fix things, you know what's guaranteed not to happen? Nothing will get better. You didn't fix them. You know, I know depression inside and out. I have lived this throughout my life. I have cycles of depression frequently. And one of the most frustrating things about them is frequently I wouldn't be depressed if I could get out of the chair and just take a few simple actions. You know, if when you're depressed you stink because it's been 3 days since you took a shower, I can promise you from personal experience, if somehow you can get out of that chair and take a shower and come out smelling nice, you are absolutely objectively less depressed than you were. Because you know what's less depressing than stinking? Smelling nice. It's less depressing. It's like literally, there's a feedback loop at work here. And if you can just find some way to make a little change, then it becomes less depressing. And as a result, because it's less depressing, it's now easier than it was to make more changes, even small ones. And the more small changes you make, the better it gets and the less depressing your circumstances are. It's a feedback loop. So for this reason, if the study of these subjects that Kenneth is talking about in this book mean anything, we see these recurring cycles of history going through these Hegelian life cycles of revolution, rising up, flourishing, decaying, and finally ossification and revolution. These are millennial cycles. They take thousands of years. What we can learn from this is absolutely you should not believe what everyone thinks at the late stage of an epoch, which is that not only does the world suck, it has always sucked, and it can never be better. Not only do people suck right now, they have always sucked, and so we shouldn't bother to try to make things better. You absolutely can't believe that. Because after each of these periods, there was a massive transformation. Like when the medievals overthrew the entire worldview of ancient Rome and replaced it with a hopeful one, a new hopeful vision that made people want to struggle to do better and to be better. And the fact that the medieval epoch ended in corruption doesn't change the fact that it started in hope and it did a lot of good in the world. This is how these cycles go. Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I have a question or an observation. The last sentence that you read, Jesus speaks of the kingdom of God and pointedly tells his hearers they should not look to the manifest itself in the world. So the question I have, the Jehovah's Witness thinks the kingdom of God is a physical thing, and God will come back and establish the kingdom here. So now that is one sect exhibiting a different thought. So as they tried to establish Christianity in the medieval time, was there that diversity of theology?
Yes.
How did that impact the adoption of the process itself?
Yes. Yes. Oh my God, Sharon. This is like the most important question about the medieval period because they come out of the gate saying, we're going to solve the problem of having 1,000 different gods who are all telling you different things. We're going to have one God, and he's going to tell you one set of things. We're going to have a single interpretive framework in theology, and that way we can all, work together. That's what they say. That's the promise of the orthodoxy of the new what eventually will be called a Catholic Church. But the problem is, not only do they have a problem with heresies flying off in every conceivable direction on every major question of theology for the entire 1,000 years of the medieval period, they don't even come out of the starting gate with a single unified perspective. I mean, when you read the earliest works that we have left from the Christians in the first and second century, they're all over the place on their theology. I mean, like you're saying, the differences that we see between the Jehovah's Witnesses and what we just talked about in Luke, those differences are there immediately. The very first written things we can find are already saying these differences. There are different Christian sects, and they do not agree at all. Matthew's group wants all the men who convert to Christianity to be circumcised and to follow Jewish law. And Paul's going, no, no. Do you ever want to convert anybody ever? Don't tell the men they have to snip off the end of their penis. They're not going to do it. I mean, yeah, you'll get one or two, but hardly any of them are going to go, yeah, I want to be part of that religion. Snip, snip. They're all going to go cross their legs and go, what other religions are there available for me to consider? I'm not really liking the sound of this one. So they're disagreeing on something as fundamental as, did Jesus come to continue and extend Jewish law? Or did Jesus come to replace Jewish law? If they disagree on that, which is pretty much the central question in the first century, they're going to disagree about everything. The example you gave, you bet. Are we going to have the kingdom of God here on earth? Or will it only be in heaven? Or does it exist within us, or some combination of these three things? Everybody has something different to say. Even in the New Testament, they have different things to say. What I like about studying this stuff is not papering over the differences. I think that's boring. I think the New Testament is the most interesting when we explore and highlight the differences because it tells us something about what was at stake for the early Christians. What could they not agree about? What did they think was important enough that they needed to write whole gospels, or in some cases forged epistles, in order to try to make their point and convince the rest of the Christians, please, you got to do it my way. This is so important to me. So we'll I've got a list of heretics and heathens that I will be. I said I would do it this week, and I didn't manage to. I will do maybe next week. I'm going to do it soon. We're going to start talking about heretics and heresies. But what you just pointed out is a classic example, and I'm glad you brought it up. That can be our heretics and heresies for this week. Where is the kingdom of God? Luke says it's in here. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for God to enforce it on earth, and you don't have to wait until you die and go to heaven to find it there. You can carry it with you right now, and that's the most revolutionary thing you can do because it changes the way you see the world. And by changing the way you see and interpret the world, it will change your behavior, and that will influence the behavior and worldview of the people around you. In other words, what we see here in Luke is the foreshadowing of the medieval revolution right there. Just by changing our worldview, we begin to transform the world, which is, not something everybody agrees, but it's a powerful thing. And it's a major part of Hegelian history philosophy, or philosophy of history. Donald, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Well, if God's all knowing and all powerful, then all this confusion and chaos in theology is his doing. Why do I need to resolve it at all? Hell, I'll just sit this one out. Maybe, I mean, if what do I care if this saint's view or that saint's view wins? that was determined by God, you know, and whether I believed in that one or the other one, that was determined too. I don't see, this is, what is this? Is this history that's all contingency and no agency? I don't know. I'm being a bit, but when you're dealing with this, I don't know. I'm glad I wasn't medieval.
Yes, the point you're making is right on, and people wrestle with this for the whole 1,000 years of the medieval period. Free will versus determinism is a tough one, but I'm gonna paraphrase Ari here, and use his words in a way that he didn't necessarily intend, but maybe he'll like it, which is that maybe the reason there's all this, suppose God has a plan here. Maybe the reason there's all this diversity of interpretation is not so that you will get the right answer, because maybe the least value to you and your soul comes from having the perfect answer. Maybe the most value comes from wrestling with the answers. It's the exploration itself. It's the thinking about these questions that if we feel comfortable we have the only answer, maybe we don't ever think about it. But if we're presented with a bunch of alternatives and people have good arguments for their positions, then it forces us to think about the nature of God and man and nature at a deeper level than we would. Jacob wrestles the angel. The rabbis argue with each other about the meanings of passages. It's pretty central to Jewish religion that these are not necessary. Some of these things might have settled answers, but a lot of these things do not have settled answers. And the whole point is not to settle them, but to explore them. That's how we become better. Yeah. As Ari says, journey before destination, life before death. Yeah. So it's where this stuff gets interesting. I think when we very first started talking about the medieval section a year ago, I used the ludicrous example, which I hope people will forgive me for, of comparing it to Dungeons and Dragons. And I compared it to Dungeons and Dragons because the very first Dungeons and Dragons books were created by wargamers who thought, wouldn't it be fun if I interrupt the Battle of Waterloo by dropping a dragon on the field? Now what happens? Okay, what are the rules for muskets against dragons? What's the rule for dragon fire against mounted soldiers? I mean, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? And they basically were hobbyists, and they put together this whole framework for how to do elves and dwarves and dragons and all that other stuff from the context of wargaming. And they wrote it all down, but they were not professional writers. They were not professional editors. They were not professional publishers. Those first, now much cherished Dungeons and Dragons little booklets, which were, Xeroxed and stapled and stuck in a box, they're a mess. I have them downstairs. They're a mess. The rules are full of holes. They're full of problems. And you might say, well, that's a failure. But as a number of observers have pointed out, the whole reason for the explosion of role-playing systems in the 70s and 80s is that they were imperfect. The Bible of role-playing was full of promising things that were exciting to think about, and it was full of problems at the exact same time. So you were drawn into it by the things that were cool, but then you were driven to try to reconcile and solve the problems in it because it had so many problems. It's not like you could ignore them. You'd be in the middle of running a game and you'd stumble across one of these contradictions. You're like, well, now what do we do? Is the rule this way or that way? Or you'd come across a passage that says, it only says in one place what to do, but it's written so badly, I can't figure it out. So what it encouraged was something that in role-playing circles is called house rules. And eventually, TSR, the company that started Dungeons and Dragons, embraced house rules and said, this is the way to go. You should totally do house rules. Every group should interpret the rules as they see fit and document what their interpretation is. And that way they can do the same thing consistently going forward. And the result is a great schism into a let 1,000 flowers bloom, says Mao Zedong. This is what happened as a result of the early Dungeons and Dragons stuff being so interesting, but so, slipshod and contradictory. And it is exactly the same thing that happened to early Christianity, right? A lot of different people with a lot of different ideas. They're in a hurry to throw together a coherent theology and a canon. So they get it done in a hurry and then they lock it down. But the problem is, after they're done, they look at it and go, there are still a lot of issues here. And now we've locked it down. So the issues are just stuck in there. We said this is the word of God, or it's at least, inspired by God. But would God contradict himself so directly as you must continue to follow Jewish law versus you should throw Jewish law away? You don't need it. How can Jesus say both of those things? And the result is 1,000 flowers bloom. All these different people rush in to try to fix the problem. And they create their little spin-off sects and groups and write their little, mystical tracts about the vision that they had of the Mother Mary telling them what's supposed to happen next. How are you supposed to behave towards one another? It's all part of that process of you stimulate somebody with a bunch of promises, but you give them a puzzle that isn't finished. It's irresistible. It causes culture. Explosions, fountains of culture result from that exact combination. Too good to ignore, but also too problematic to ignore. It makes everybody want to fix it. And there's 1,000 years of medieval history right there, theological history. All right, well, let's continue on in paragraph 9, see how far we can get. After all, we've got 44 minutes. I think we're going to get there. Here we go. Next sentences 3 and 4. Kenneth says, God rules over the unseen tides of our inner lives, the powers in our souls. The work of spirit is overwhelmingly moral and manifests itself by the changes that are wrought in our shape and strength of conscience and will. This is God's domain, his realm of authority. Now that's interesting, right? Because he's interpreting Luke as saying that God's not the God of volcanoes and earthquakes and whether it rains today or not. I mean, maybe he's in charge of those things, maybe he's not. But there's no point in focusing on them because God's going to do with those things whatever he's going to do with those things. Your prayers about those things can't change them, but they can change you and your inner world. And by changing your inner world, you can change your circumstances and what you all work to do. And that's how change can be manifested in the world. Not that you prevented the Lisbon earthquake by praying to God that there be no earthquakes in Portugal, but by praying for guidance afterwards about what to do so that you can then help survivors of the earthquake. You can knit yourselves together, do some good in the world, make something good happen. And maybe future cities, you're going to be inspired to build buildings in new ways that don't suffer as much damage in earthquakes. This is what he means when he says this is God's domain and realm of authority. There is tremendous potential to change the world by changing our own character. And we change our own character through devotion and prayer and the working to be less of a club that tries to smash its will onto the world and trying to transform ourselves instead into an empty vessel in which the goodness and will of God and Jesus's teachings have room to live in the world. This is one of the critical concepts of theology. We were talking about stories earlier, and one of the things that we talked about is I can't remember if it was Stephen. Somebody was talking about the difference between what we want and what we need, what we want and what might be good for us. We frequently want the wrong things. And I when he was talking, I put a quote from Heraclitus: "It would not be better for men to get exactly what they want." That's one of the ones that Kenneth knows and loves. He cites it all the time. And the point is that although the naive interpretation of self is that if we want something, then it must be good for us. As we gain experience in life, we come to understand how often we crave things that are bad for us. They might be, yes, may the Greek gods grant your wish. They might be pleasurable in the short term, but still hurt us and vitiate us in the long term, like shooting up with heroin. I feel good now, but am I going to feel good when I enter withdrawal? And am I going to feel good later with the consequences of all the things I was going to do today that now I can't do because I'm lying in bed feeling so good. There are unintended consequences to our choices. And those unintended consequences are easy to overlook when we're just in the role of wanting. But if we actually get the things we want, the unintended consequences come too, and they may come to dominate our assessment of whether it was worth it or not. This is all part of the issue of wanting, and this is built into. I cited Robert McKee's book Story, and it's one of the points he makes most firmly in his book. If you're interested in writing and storytelling and you've never read Robert McKee's book, I commend it to you. It is extremely well written. It is the book based on the classes that he teaches to Hollywood script writers. He started at a phase when Hollywood scripts were terrible. They were just so bad. And he talks about that in the book. And he says, you know, what this situation in Hollywood calls for is a rededication of our entire industry to the craft of storytelling. And so he writes this book to say, well, what is storytelling and why does it exist? And how does it work? What is it supposed to do for people? And one of the things he says is, it is absolutely not about one thing happens, then another thing happens, then another, and then the end. That's not a story at all. That's a plot. To be a story, it has to be about character. Story, he says, is about a protagonist, and a protagonist is a willful character who's ripe for change. They want something so bad, and they're going to try to get it. They're willful. But probably they don't want the right thing. They want something that, from their perspective, would obviously be the thing anybody would want if they were that kind of person in that kind of situation. But it's actually going to make their life worse, or it's unattainable. And pursuing it makes their life worse because they're never going to get it. And what you do in the structure of the story is show in little steps over and over and over how when they take the most obvious reasonable step to get what they want, and they think that they're going to have it, instead they don't have it. And something else happens. And they have a feeling about that something else. And maybe it's a comedy and the feeling is laughter. Maybe it's a romance and the feeling is attraction. Maybe it's horror and the feeling is fear. Oh God, a vampire? No, 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 no. I didn't want a vampire. That wasn't why I entered the door. I wanted to go after that pretty lady. Instead, here's Dracula. It says there is a gap, an emotionally charged gap between what we thought would happen when we got what we wanted, when we took that step, versus what actually happened, what the real world had to teach us about the consequences of wanting that thing and pursuing that thing. And he says each of these is one of the steps in the story, and then after they absorb the consequences, the undesired consequences of their action, they again think, what is the smallest, most reasonable step I could take to get the thing that I still want? Evidently, that was the wrong choice, but there must be some right choice that's going to get me what I want. And so they keep doing that until they finally are put into a crisis where they realize this isn't working at all. I wonder if I want the wrong thing. Maybe I should pursue something else, something that's more important, something I need. And this is the structure of story, right? According to Robert McKee. It's the structure of many stories. And in this, what we're seeing is these issues of desire, and this plays into this question of what is prayer for? And we're seeing these issues of character. Why do we want the things that we want? What would it take for us? What would reality have to confront us with to teach us that that thing we want is not actually good for us? Can we learn it? If we can, what does it take to learn it? And how do we move from the realization that the thing we've been pursuing for 41 years is not actually something worth having? Or maybe it's worth having, but nobody is going to get to have it. It's just not on the table. What do we do then? So storytelling and prayer, storytelling, authentic storytelling, the sacred storytelling of Dionysus, on which Greek tragedy, and by the way, this guy quotes Aristotle all the damn time. All the things we've talked about tragedy, they're in Robert McKee. So what happens? You know, all of this stuff is put together in order to try to help us cultivate our character into a healthier direction, to find a path that's closer to sophrosune than was possible when we were merely enthusiastic about watching old Star Trek episodes, which, you know, I like, but there's a time and a place for that. Maybe I need to take a shower. Maybe it's time for my philosophy seminar. I should turn off the Star Trek. So yeah, plot is what happens. Story is why it happens. You're right, Geneva. The meaning to the character, and therefore the meaning to us that we can take away into our lives, because we probably aren't going to encounter that exact situation. But the issue of wanting the right thing, and how open are we to noticing the undesired consequences and learning from them? That's the kind of thing Sharon's definition of prayer was all about. Maybe we shouldn't be asking God to give us goodies, but if we pray for understanding, then maybe we'll notice more quickly when we're aiming the wrong way. Hamartia, missing the mark. Being open to the lessons of hamartia is one of the fastest ways to develop your character, but it only works if you're not busy trying to cover up your mistakes and pretend that that didn't happen. So all of this is involved. All right, so what's next? We were on 3 and 4. Let's move on to the rest of paragraph. Well, the next chunk of paragraph 9 anyway. Sentences 5 through 9. Here we go. Early Christians and Christ himself expected the unruly world to draw to a conclusion within the lifetime of some who were hearing Jesus's own words. We'll go to the rest in a moment, but this needs to be emphasized. Paul is crystal clear on this point. The world is going to end during our lifetime. And Jesus, in at least one of the Gospels, is clear about this point. He tells the guy being crucified on the cross next to him, I say to you today, we will see each other in heaven. And of course, Greek at that point did not have commas. Oh, what a problem. Because as he's saying, I say to you, comma, today we will see each other in heaven. Or is he saying to you, I say to you today, comma, eventually we will see each other in heaven. There's all these things in there where he might be saying that that the coming of the Lord is now, and that his death is just lighting the stick of dynamite, and the old corrupt world is going to blow up now, and it's going to bring an end to all these problems, and now good things are going to come. Sharon was asking about this, the schisms and the differentiation within the early church. This was the biggest issue, but weirdly, at first nobody disagreed. They all thought it was happening in their life, maybe in 3 years. Some people thought it was going to happen at the moment of crucifixion, and were mighty surprised when it didn't. But they adjusted. He said, okay, so maybe it's not his death. Maybe it's after his resurrection. Okay, maybe it's not after his resurrection. Maybe it's after a year or 10 years, or maybe it's before we die. Paul has a whole passage where he talks about that, where he says, people are asking him, and I think this is the clincher. If you want to know how many early Christians believed that the coming of the Lord was going to happen in their lifetime, some of them actually ask him, but Paul, some of our people have died already. The Lord hasn't come yet, but they've died. Does that mean they're not going to get to participate in the kingdom of heaven? Only we who are still alive will get to? And Paul says, no, man, because Jesus is going to bring them back too. They're going to be resurrected. The fact that the coming of the Lord didn't happen before they died doesn't mean that they'll be excluded. We who are alive, of course, are included because it's going to happen while we're alive. But those who passed, they'll get to participate too. Jesus will bring them back. So when Paul's writing, pretty much everybody thinks it's going to happen now. And it becomes a major problem that it doesn't. The gospel writers, among others, explicitly are writing about this problem. They're writing to try to change the time frame of the second coming of the Lord. And long before the Gospels, 1 Clement, which is written before the Gospels are written, they are already saying we're having a problem in our church because we've got all these people who are like, where the hell is the second coming? And some of them are leaving because it hasn't happened yet and people are dying off, and where's Jesus? And 1 Clement talks about the problem and says, we need you to help to lead your faithful to understand that it isn't necessarily going to happen in our life. Unlike what we all believed, it isn't necessarily going to happen in our lifetime. It may happen later. You need to adjust your sermons and your theology to give people patience and perseverance and help them to understand they might be in this for the long haul. So what he's talking about here, this is what he's alluding to. It is one of the major crises of the first 150 years of Christianity. One of the defining crises. He continues, Jesus tried repeatedly to rupture the materialist assumptions of those who kept looking for God to exert his power in the outer world, just as St. Paul tried to defeat the naive egocentrism of the church in Ephesus, which supposed that worldly wealth was a sign of that God was pleased with them. And before we go on, it's like, it's the thing about prosperity gospel today, which I guess is huge, not just in the United States, but South Korea. Oh my God, the prosperity gospel is everywhere in South Korea. It might even be the dominant form of Christianity in South Korea. They're just so sure. Join the church, get rich. That's how it works. That's how you know if you have been faithful to God. And if you're a good person, you'll be rich. If you're not rich, you must be bad. Get better. Get better and you get rich. It's so on the nose in many of these Korean Christian churches that it's shocking to American Christians because most of us don't talk that way. Most American Christian churches aren't telling you the reason to join the church is to get rich quick, right?
Joel Osteen. Sorry
Yes.
to contradict you.
Joel
Wait,
Osteen.
are you talking about South Korean churches?
Yes.
Huh, I didn't know you knew so much about South Korean churches.
I was watching documentaries.
Oh,
Yes, about Christianity in the modern world.
uh-huh. And they
And
were
Joel
using,
Osteen, the biggest prosperity gospel, the smiley pastor,
right here in the US.
right here in the US. I think he's in Texas. I'm not
Yes.
sure.
I can't remember where he's located, but you're right. He has giant mega churches. He
Yes,
he designs them to conspicuously show off the wealth of the church.
exactly.
Look at all the gold.
Korea has come a long way. Like 30 years ago, I would tell people, oh, I'm from South Korea or Korea. They would say, Korea, what is that? You know,
Yes.
Korea it's come a long way. It's
Yes.
amazing.
And I have to imagine that the popularity of the prosperity gospel in South Korea is probably caused by the fact that Korea has had to dig its way out of some poverty. I mean, World War II was devastating for Korea, but the Korean War, again, right? All kinds of problems, I mean, I think about it took what, 15 to 20 years for Britain to recover from the poverty of World War II. I was watching, there's a series on PBS about the National Health Service, the rise of the National Health Service. It's called Call the Midwife. And it's based on diaries and letters from that period. And it's just, if you've never seen it, if you're interested in history, it is one of the just most faithful recreations of what life was like in Britain after World War II.
My favorite show.
It's fantastic, isn't it? It's just great. But one of the things that is just apparent is how many people are just desperately poor. I mean, they are barely holding each other together, and it's the community that's holding everybody together and helping. And it's why you have to have these midwives. I mean, there is just no access to hospitals for most Britons when the series begins. That changes over the 20, 30 years that they've gone through so far in the show. But if it was that bad in Britain, I have to think that Korea being hit first by World War II and then by the Korean War, there must have been intense poverty.
Oh yeah, because it's because of the Korean Japanese invasion is why my family became so poor, and that's why I ended up in an orphanage.
Exactly.
Make the long story short. And that's
Exactly.
how I ended up coming to America.
Yeah.
I mean, our family was of the aristocratic class, and we had land, we had blah, blah, blah. And then Japanese just ruined everything. They defunct the monetary system.
Yes.
I mean, I tell the story of when I was like 5 years old, I saw all these wads of money in this cabinet, and I said, Mommy, we have money. And my mother said, that's no good. That's the kind of life where I started.
Yeah.
Yeah, it directly affected my own personal life.
Of course. Of course. And it's when I say these things, I'm not telling Ginny anything she doesn't know. She lived it. Um, it's what what the Japanese army did in Korea was horrific. It was war crimes upon war crimes upon war crimes. They paid reparations. They probably need to pay more. I mean, it was just awful. But you can see why people coming out of such desperate, dire poverty would be attracted to a variant of the religion that said, here's a way that you don't have to be poor anymore. You know, and it's the same here in the US. The prosperity gospel is popular among poor people. Because it offers a possible way out. So anyway, this is what he's talking about when he's alluding to rupturing the materialist assumptions of those who kept looking for God to exert his power in the outer world. And the Church of Ephesus and its interest in worldly wealth. All of this stuff is playing around these questions of what is God's duty to you? Is God promised to make you rich? Or is God, involved in your life for some other reason? And if so, what is that other reason? And how do you get people who really, more than anything else, they need a little money? If they had a little money, a whole raft of their problems would go away. And that's what they need. And how do you tell them, you're not going to get that from this religion? Then maybe the community can help make things a little better, but we're not going to make you rich. We can't make ourselves rich. That's not why we're doing this. You can see why there'd be a wrestling match about this. And one of the things that Kenneth likes to talk about Ephesus is he's like, okay, so Paul writes an entire epistle to the Ephesians going, Jesus Christ, why are you so obsessed with money? I guess literally, he says, in the name of Jesus Christ, why are you so obsessed with money? He says, this is not the first time people have taken issue with the goddamn Ephesians. Because Heraclitus has fragments where he curses out the Ephesians. He says, what is it with you guys? All you care about is money. Did you know there's other important things in the world? You should be pursuing wisdom. But instead, you're like, look at all my pretty, pretty money. Like Scrooge McDuck swimming in swimming pools full of money. And Kenneth just laughs when he says this. He says, Ephesus was the second richest city in the entire Roman Empire. I mean, they were a major trade port, and they had been for centuries. And so much wealth passed through their hands. He said, if anybody wants to understand the way in which wealth can corrupt you, just look at what Heraclitus has to say, and then jump ahead 550 years to Paul, St. Paul, talking to the Ephesians, and he's saying the same thing. Half a millennium later, you people still suck. It's like, this is how much money has poisoned their lives. They can't be wise, and they can't be, humble and open to God. They just keep wanting everything to turn down to, well, how do I fill my wallet? He's saying, character. Character is fate. Ephesus has a character. It's part of what makes it hilarious that's where Heraclitus drops off his scroll, which includes lines saying, screw you, Ephesus. You people suck. It's hilarious. And, he's not, unlike St. Paul, when Heraclitus criticizes Ephesus, he's criticizing his own hometown. And by hometown, I mean he came from the royal family that ruled Ephesus. His family was the one that ran the Eleusinian rites in Ephesus, because rulership and religion were often tied together in the ancient Greek world. And he's put all that aside. He said, I don't want to be rich. I don't want to be powerful and influential. It makes you stupid. I don't want to be stupid anymore. I'm going to go live in the mountains. And I'm going to think deep thoughts and try to figure out how to be a, decent human being. So, he gave up all that stuff. When he's chewing it out, he's not chewing it out like sour grapes of somebody who's never been wealthy. He's chewing it out like somebody who's been there, done that, and it sucks. You shouldn't want it. Power makes stupid. Heraclitus doesn't say it, but really, it's almost impossible to avoid coming to that conclusion after watching him slap around Ephesus in his fragments. Joe, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Hey everyone. I have actually a really brief and simple question. I mean, and I really, we've talked about character being fate, and I really, really subscribe to that. I mean, in the sense that that is what you control, and that's the world you create for yourself and how you behave. But I was wondering, and even if somebody were to pray, or let's just say they were hoping, and they were to hope for the good, or hope even for things that aren't for the bad, if you will. that are not in their interests, or they get things that they want that really they shouldn't, they would have been better if they hadn't got it. But I was wondering what Kenneth's thoughts are on the whole idea of hope. It's because it really is complex. And I mean, I can only say it so far as that, you can hope for something, and it's really, you're not engaging with reality to some degree. It's even a form of avoidance. And I understand there are positive and negative aspects of it. But, and so when people even, pray for something, they're hoping for it many times. And maybe it's a way of, and I'm not being critical of anyone that does pray for something. It's just that, it's a way of actually maybe not facing the problem that is actually in front of you, which is something that is within your control. So, I mean, I'm just thinking about this and how he would, kind of feel about that in particular, because we're talking a lot about how the external God has been depicted and the impact that, that the changes had and how power structures impacted people. But even just so from a personal perspective, do you think if you asked him, would he say somebody should hope, or it would be healthy?
Yes. What a good question. What a good question. The funny thing about hope is, on the one hand, you absolutely have to have some in your life. If you don't have any hope, well, then you're depressed. And that is not a fun path. There are many things about which I'm not an expert, but I'm perfectly happy to say depression is not a blast. It's not a great path forward. You need hope. But as much as it is like a vitamin you have to have, it's also something that can absolutely destroy you. Cornford, in his book Thucydides Myth Historicus, I think he talks about it as well in From Religion to Philosophy. I can't quite remember now. But definitely in Thucydides Myth Historicus, he says to the Greeks, the story of Pandora, right? That she was human beings were irritating the Titans, and so they gifted Pandora, the first woman who was going to be handed over to a woman. I think it was a Prometheus, gifted with a chest that no one was supposed to open. She was told not to open the chest. It was just something that she had. But she couldn't, she was too curious, and she opened the chest, and it turned out it was full of terrible things: plague, old age, misery, poverty. All these terrible things were in the chest. And they all fly out to afflict the world. And in horror, she tries to slam the lid shut, but she doesn't manage to slam it in time, and almost everything gets away into the world. And that's where all the evil daimons come from, is from Pandora's chest. But say the modern translations of the myth, there's good news, because when she closed the chest, she closed it in time to capture hope, because hope was in the chest. This is where we get the term a hope chest. And because hope was there, it was a blessing to alleviate, to compensate for the sufferings of all of the daimones that afflict mankind. This is the way that Edith Hamilton says it in her book on mythology. Almost everybody says it this way in their books on mythology. And Cornford says, oh, no, 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 no. It's not that it was a chest full of a bunch of evils and one good. It's that it was a chest full of evils. And that from the Greek perspective, hope is every bit as much a problem as it is a blessing. It says, when the Athenians defeat the Spartans in several battles, and then they get excited and say, well, if we're winners and winners win, let's go win in Syracuse, Sicily. Let's build this great fleet and sail to Sicily, because, man, how cool would it be to dominate trade, not only in the Eastern Mediterranean as we do now, but also the Western Mediterranean. We could control trade from Carthage to Italy, through Greece, to the Middle East. This would be fantastic. They hope for it, and their desire for it, for that hope, elpis is the term for hope. Their desire for it is so strong, it leads them into the catastrophe that ruins Athens. long before the Spanish Armada, the greatest fleet that ever sailed, was built by the Athenians with as much wealth as they could put on it, all their best and brightest. They all sailed off and they all died. Hardly anybody came home. And Cornford says that Thucydides says this is about hope. And this is because the concept, which he gets from Aeschylus and others, is that hope is every bit as much of a curse as it is a blessing. Hope can be the thing that tempts you into hubris. The hope for something you can't actually have, but you think you ought to have, can be a disaster. So, and Kenneth knows all this stuff. So, I think his argument would be that hope is less like a virtue or a vice, and it's more like a knife whose virtue is its sharp edge. And the problem is that sharp edge can cut your cheese or it can cut your hand, and it can do either one. And only the circumstances in which it's being wielded can tell you if it's a blessing or a curse. And where Aristotle would weigh in here is the same way he weighs in on the difference between good government and bad government. He says the difference is sophrosune. If you hope for what is healthy for you, then it is healthy to want that. That's a healthy hope. But if you hope for what is unhealthy for you, then it's bad for you, and that's an unhealthy hope. And sophrosune is the key. That's the answer to figuring out whether hope is a blessing or a curse. It's case by case. It depends.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's an interesting answer, because it's I see it the way it was just described, is that it's kind of linked to desire, and then in that sense, like
Yes.
you want to desire the good.
Yes.
You don't want to desire something that is harmful. I mean, and what we mistaken as good is obviously something that material things often that we seek, and they are not necessarily truly satisfying. I was just thinking about it in terms of you know you hope somebody doesn't die. I mean, something like that, and so that's a lack of engaging with it, reality, to a certain degree, and it's not a bad thing to hope for. And I'm just thinking about it from that that perspective. Is like, is it really the wrong thing to hope for? And if it is, then so what is hope? Is it good or bad? I've been struggling with it. That's all.
So I'll take us back to Sharon's point about prayer, because I think it applies to hope every bit as much. If you only hope for your cat, like I did last December, my 18-year-old cat, Surya, if you only hope for your cat not to die, then that can lead you to passivity, and you don't take the cat to the vet. And then the cat who was sick, in fact, does die because you took too long to get them help. That can happen, for sure. It's happened in my own life. But if, in addition to being clear about your hopes, you're also clear about your situation, you're honest with yourself about your problems, then you can put two and two together. Once they're both in front of you, then you can say, I don't want my cat to die, but she sounds sick and I haven't done anything about it. Maybe I need to get off my butt and take my cat to the vet so that she can get treated. So it can, when hope is combined with honesty about your situation, it can become a catalyst to action rather than something that pacifies you. It's so, once again, we're back to hope has two sides.
Yeah, it was just interesting because I thought about that with prayer quite a bit. I mean, and when you think about it in terms of, and that's where I was kind of linking it to desire. But it's like you can desire something that is, potentially, and obviously, the way I think you answered it probably is in the sense that if you, as long as your hope is somehow aligned to reality, then that allows you to act in a way that is healthy.
Yes.
So it's no longer, well, you can walk away and you'll have a deeper insight that you would have otherwise, if you hadn't contemplated, done some type of contemplation. And it kind of reveals potentially, obviously a good or a bad value. And so, I mean, it reveals in the sense that, well, what am I hoping for? And it's like, well, I'm hoping for the wrong thing or the right thing. And sometimes people were just confused. But anyway, I think it's something that, it's also something that you can go take the opposite and say, what if the worst case scenario, maybe I should take advantage of the moments that I do have with people.
Yeah.
That would be the opposite
Yeah.
of engaging with hope. So is imagining them gone. I don't need to take us off that far. I mean, it is related to the prayer aspect of it, and
It is.
and it's definitely related to. I'm in the car, but I think it was the first line in paragraph 9 or 8. I forget. But it was, I think it was 9. It might have been. Yeah, I don't know. I forget actually. So
Yes.
it was something.
Paragraph 8, sentence 1. Men naively sought help from God, a way of overcoming the vicissitudes of an unjust world. But what they learned is that, and in the next sentences he says, what they learned is that the more important thing is to accept what's real,
Right. That's it.
and then find a path forward that makes the best of your situation. Yeah. Yeah, and that's how it is with hope too. So, my kitty story around hope was we had two elderly cats, and I lost the first one first about 5 years ago. He had kidney problems. He was born with a kidney defect. One of his kidneys was shrunk up the size of a raisin, and it didn't work very well. So he's really operating on one kidney. And one of the things most people don't know about cats is that they're designed to get kidney stones. They have a high protein diet, very high protein diet. They're obligate carnivores, despite the fact that my current kitties eat grass. Nevertheless, they're obligate carnivores. You push that much protein through your body, and you're going to get kidney stones, right? I mean, they're lucky they don't get gout. But the reason this works in cats is that cats can pass kidney stones more easily than people can, and they only get kidney stones in one kidney at a time. And then that kidney shuts down while it's busy passing the stone, and the other kidney takes over. And the problem with our poor Rashid is that with one kidney the size of a raisin, the first time he got a kidney stone, there was no other kidney to take over the work. And so at age 7, we started him on a lifelong process of surgery and medicine that culminated in getting, stents installed and ports and flushing out his kidneys to keep him clean. And he lived another 7 years. And when he eventually passed about 5 years ago, we never did find out what he passed from because I wasn't sure how sick he was. He was on some meds. He'd been put on a new med, and they said it might cause nausea, and he was throwing up. And I thought, well, it's probably the meds. He needs the med. It's helping him with a more serious problem. So let's wait and see. And it turned out that was the wrong answer. He was far sicker than we thought he was. Cats do that a lot. They hide their illness. And I got him to the vet, and it was during COVID. And, vets had been retiring all over because they were so frustrated by the stress. There weren't enough vets at the vet place. And I just basically sat out there in the parking lot waiting for my turn to go in, and he died there. So that taught me a lesson about hope. Like Joe's talking about, you can't just passively hope for good things. You have to intervene to try to do something that will help. If I'd intervened sooner, maybe he would have died anyway. It depends on what he had, but maybe he would still be alive. I don't know. We'll never know.
That's another good quality about animals. They don't complain. They don't say,
Yeah.
"Oh, this hurts." They don't complain, right?
I kind of wish our cats would be a little clearer about their problems so we could intervene more. My other kitty, Surya, lived longer. She lived till last December. She died on the solstice. And in her case, after the example of Rashid, I was like, I am not waiting around. We're pretty sure she's not feeling well. I'm going right to the vet. So we did go right to the vet. But in this case, it turned out that it wasn't relevant that I went to the vet because she had a problem that had been accumulating for years and there was nothing they could do about it. Her trachea had collapsed. When she was young, she used to throw up a lot and it had weakened her trachea. And when she got old, it collapsed and she just wasn't able to get enough air. She was doing her best, but if you stay at low oxygen levels, Sharon knows this, anybody who works in a hospital knows this. If your body is at low oxygen levels for too long, gradually all your systems begin to fall apart because they need oxygen. And that was what was happening to her. So we had her put to sleep while we petted her and told her how much we loved her because it was the only way forward. Hope, right? In this case, hope led me to act, but 2K circumstances meant that it didn't really matter that we had acted, except that we were able to keep her from having a really long, drawn out, difficult, suffering death. She was able to die in the happiest possible way with us, petting her and telling her that we loved her. So, with our next kitties, you better believe we're right on top of taking them into the vet every time. It's like, if we go too many times, that's fine. It's better than not knowing. We need to know what to do so we can be good kitty parents. Hope is complicated. It's complicated. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I just wanted to confirm that Kenneth loves to go off on Ephesus. The idea that two complete epics found that was a good place to leave, to be from. So it's not accidental. This is not some casual thing. He knows Heraclitus and Ephesus, and he certainly knows Paul and Ephesus.
Yes.
And he just likes the idea. What other civilization will render a judgment about Ephesus?
It is hilarious that two completely different epochs with completely radically different worldviews both arrive at the same conclusion. You people suck. We're out of here. This is terrible. Why do you behave like this? Money is poisoning you, man. It's just making you with all the wrong values. It would be hilarious if Ephesus remained to this day a giant, incredibly rich center of power, and you had modern philosophers, Descartes or Hegel or Nietzsche, going, Jesus, Ephesus is still a mess. What the hell is wrong with these guys? But no, under the Roman period, their harbor silted up, and that was the end of Ephesus. So we never got to find out if Ephesus could disgust Nietzsche, but I'm hopeful that they could have irritated him too. So all right. Let's wrap up these sentences. We've got a few minutes left. He says, and St. Ambrose had to deal with thickwits who heard but could not comprehend Jesus' admonition to lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. You ask me, wrote Ambrose, how can I put my treasure in heaven? Give it to the poor. Apparently, wealthy dullards conceived of heaven as a sort of Swiss bank account, a vault safer than this precarious world. They wanted to know how to transfer their funds up there. And Ambrose is like, what is wrong with you? That's not what any of this means. That's not how you do this. How can you not understand? And of course, we're back to Nietzsche. Power makes stupid. They couldn't understand because obviously money's good. They've got a lot of it and it's been good for them. God is good. God must understand how good money is. He must help them to keep all their money. It's like, how can you read, what Jesus wrote and walk away from that thinking, hey, this great bank is coming. I'm gonna get to deposit my funds in heaven. Finally, he finishes up paragraph 9. Even Christianity's most emotional converts could not necessarily raise their mentality above thingly goods. It did not dawn on them that Christianity meant to revolutionize the crass outer world only secondarily, but the inner world of how we see that world primarily. Trying to induce people to understand a transvaluation when they hardly comprehend values at all is a thankless task. And of course, you should be hearing the Nietzsche there, right? The transvaluation of values. This is a Nietzsche reference. Nietzsche's excoriating moderns for their failure to understand values. And of course, he's describing the transition from the ancient world to the medieval world as a transvaluation of values, and the transition from the medieval world to the modern world as another transvaluation of values. And so all of this is what Kenneth's referring to here. It's like you can be in the presence of these astonishing transformations, like Jesus with his revolutionary message, and utterly fail to see that it's revolutionary at all. because that stuff's just falling on deaf ears. Heraclitus has a line in which he says, eyes and ears make poor witnesses to men having barbarian souls. If your character is barbarous, you could be personally attending the Sermon at the Mount and still come away not getting the point of any of it and thinking that it's telling you being rich is great. Yeah, rich. That's what he said. It's great to be rich. Like, I'm pretty sure that's not what he said, but I can see how from your perspective, that's the only thing you could walk away from it with, because that's all you could see in the world. This is that same frustration. Speaking of things, I know we're at the end. Speaking of things Kenneth likes to quote, he loves to quote William Blake and his letter to Reverend Trussler, in which Trussler doesn't want to pay for the painting that he commissioned from Blake because he doesn't like it. And Blake's busy saying, it's a great painting. I don't know what your problem is. And besides, you said a tree is a stupid thing to paint. So I don't understand how you see the world that way. A tree is a magnificent thing to paint. It's nature brought into your room. And he says, I think the problem is that you only care about money, and that's the only thing you can see in the world. As a man is, so he sees, says Blake. Kenneth loves that line. He uses it all the time. He says the problem is for Homo sapiens, we look at the world like it's a Rorschach test. And all we can see in it is the things that we are prepared to project onto it. And even if it's trying to tell us the opposite of that, we're inclined not to notice. Jesus must have liked money as much as I do. Surely. Everybody must love money. What else could there be? And that's where we wrap up.